Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Consumer Home Network. Our next product is one that I am very excited about, and every single busy businesswoman in our audience should be excited for it too. But let me start with a question. How many of you have found yourself at 5:01 p.m., your workday is finally over, and your friends are all headed to the club, but you're not able to get there? You're stuck in a taxi cab downtown. You're stuck running another errand for your boss before you can finally be done for the day. You're wearing your best power suit. That's no evening gown. That's no evening dress. That's not a going out top. That's your workwear. Who wants to party in that? Well, let me tell you, the only clutch you may have is full of invoices and notes from that afternoon's meeting. But there's still a way that you can go from business girl to party girl at a moment's notice. How can you do that? Well, introducing our very next product here. It's an exclusive for all of you watching at home so far. Not going to be available to the general public until a month from now. It is the Filofax Secret Sipper. Now, take a look at this. It's a great product. Get in real tight on this, cameraman. It's a personal planner, and it also has a discreet compartment for the unexpected times that you may be in where you just need to get away from it all at a moment's notice. It's more than just a trapper keeper for businesswomen. It is an all-in-one portfolio and party platform. The Filofax Secret Sipper has a patented technology in it called as above, so below. And what that means is it's designed with 3 rings on the top half and 3 on the lower half. And it's designed that way because we all know how frustrating it is when you're trying to carry papers around in a normal 3-ring binder and they rip so easily. And then to fix it, you gotta go get the page hole reinforcements from the store. Those are a nightmare to try and line up with the existing hole. They don't even work most of the time. You don't have to worry about that with this design. As above, so below fixes all of that. Isn't that awesome? No more accidental paper rips while turning the pages. But what truly sets it apart from the competition, and this is real great. I love this stuff. Every time this comes across our desk here at the Consumer Home Network, I know I've got to get it on the air. There is a unique Zeem attachment. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. What in the world is a Zeem attachment? Well, let me tell you, it is an insulated, cooling, gel-lined pouch perfectly sized for a single bottle of Zima and is guaranteed to stay cold all throughout your workday. I know how that sounds. How can I get the same power of a Stanley thermos for my camp gear as I can in my bag? Well, let me tell you, I don't know how they figured it out over there at Filofax, but they did it. And it's incredible. We tested this product yesterday. Sure enough, we put the bottle of Zima right out of the icebox, right into the patented pouch. And sure enough, by 5 o'clock, still cold as when we put it in there. It's incredible. Order now today. 4 easy payments of $29.99. And one of these guys can be yours. I guarantee you these are going to go fast, so dial now. Do not wait. I'm told we're already halfway sold out, so make sure you pick up the phone now if you haven't already and order yourself the Filofax Secret Sipper with Zeem attachment. And what do we say every time we look at this product? Well, I'll teach it to you. We unzip it, grip it, and rip it. Hello, and thank you for joining us in Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to a highly fixated review of large, dense books, specifically the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate, and I am one of the co-hosts here.
My name is Cody.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Will.
And this week we are going to be discussing chapters 16, 17, and 18 of Bleeding Edge. Will, do you have a summary for us? All right. What did we think of these chapters?
I rather enjoyed them. I think similar to last episode, the was it 13 through 15. I don't want to say there's not much going on, but it's a lot of build up. I think there's some really good horror and hard boiled writing in these chapters that I absolutely loved. Especially there's some really damn good horror writing in here.
Yeah, true.
And I've been reading a lot more horror stuff lately, so that was a very nice thing to come into. It went by faster than I thought it would for the page count. This was like 30 some odd pages, and it didn't feel like that at all.
True.
But yeah, I enjoyed it. It was not my favorite section of chapters, but it was a good time reading them, and there's some interesting sections that I'm looking forward to discussing.
Yeah, I think that you're right. There, from a standpoint of like actual things happening, there's not a ton going on until like the second half of 17 and most of chapter 18 for sure.
Yeah.
But I will say that, so when I'm, not that anyone cares how I annotate books, but when I'm annotating books, if it's just like a passage that I really enjoy the writing of or something like that, I highlight it. And then if it's something that I'm going to be writing like a piece of marginalia on, I underline it in pen. And I want to say like these 3 chapters have the least amount of marginalia notes and the most amount of highlighted passages from just a standpoint of being able to enjoy Thomas Pynchon's prose in these chapters.
Yes, that's definitely true.
Yeah, there is certainly less from a standpoint of sort of like, you know, research or significant plot detail here, other than the death that occurs in chapter 17. But there is a lot to be enjoyed from a standpoint of Thomas Pynchon's writing style and how he continues to sort of develop his hard-boiled sort of writing, which this book has more of than any other in his particular, you know, canon of work, mixed with, to your point, Cody, that like inherent sort of horror that feels like if Lovecraft could write The Trial by Kafka, I think describes a lot of the way that he depicts bureaucracy and conspiracy in this book, from a standpoint of like, you know, these inner machinations and these different levels of government or civilian or sort of WASP power, do almost take on a personified creation of evil, which I think he's kind of applying the Azrael tag to, which we'll obviously talk about rather as we go on. So there's a lot of good writing here to really love. And that was the main takeaway I had from these chapters. Aside from the slight rabbit hole I went down on the research around Moskovitz.
Yeah, these chapters are probably my favorite of the chapters so far. To be honest, yeah, I really like these chapters. They're a bit more like y'all were saying, they're a bit more genre-y, like more kind of detective-y, horror-ish. I really enjoyed the whole thing about the professional nose. You know, it's really absurd and really funny, and there's all those like nose puns, like let me pick your, you know, and all that. I really enjoyed that a lot. I like the absurdity of these chapters is really fun. Yeah, I mean, these are just kind of fun chapters that are just fun to read, and the prose is really good, like y'all were saying, and I just kind of like how absurd it is, and it's not like your typical kind of literary fiction, you know, type of absurdity. It's a little bit more genre fiction absurdity, which I also like. I like it when Pynchon dips more into genre type stuff. Because up until now, we haven't, you know, like the part with the nose, especially, but you know, also the part in the tunnel with the creature. You know, other than detective fiction, we haven't gotten a lot of kind of genre flourishes in this book yet. And I like those genre flourishes a lot in these chapters.
Yeah, I don't know if I can agree 100% with the statement that these are your favorite chapters. so far. I really do enjoy them quite a bit. Like you mentioned, Luke, there's kind of that departure from the common ground of this kind of Vineland-esque, straightforward literary writing, and the way that the satire is used in the context of the genre elements, alongside his willingness in this book, as with a couple of others, to break out of the actual narrative structure and just speak to the reader, which happens a couple times in these chapters, is a really full and punch. It's just a lot of fun to read. I don't know if I love it per se, but just because, as far as actual emotional investment through these chapters, it's kind of limited to how much you care about a couple of specific side characters. And beyond that, you don't have the fun mechanistic, or the mechanistic stuff that I find fun in these chapters so much as there is a lot of fun satire and interesting prosaic elements. It's kind of a mixed bag in terms of how much I enjoy it, but it's overall obviously pretty high quality.
True. Can I ask you a follow-up question, Luke?
Yeah.
So you didn't necessarily enjoy the karaoke sequence, at least in your recap of those chapters. It didn't seem like you enjoyed it too much. What stands out as particularly enjoyable about the absurdism in these chapters versus that?
I guess there's a little bit more of a point to the absurdity in these chapters in terms of the larger narrative arc as I see it so far in the book. Looking back on the karaoke chapters, I mean, they were a bit more important than I thought, because it kind of, I think we were introduced to Lester in those scenes. Lester's obviously a big part in these chapters, which I didn't necessarily pick up. I didn't necessarily remember he would be. But yeah, that's pretty much my answer. Is just that it seems a bit more relevant to the larger arc of the book. I mean, the nose guy kind of moves the plot forward in terms of figuring out who killed Lester. And then I don't the whole Montauk thing in this book. It does seem to be kind of I have a hard time kind of putting it into words, like how how and why it's important. Because I guess I'm guided by the fact that I read this book like 10 years ago, and I feel like that was one of my main takeaways, is that there's some connection there between the Montauk Project stuff and the kind of greater themes of the book and stuff. Like, I'm having trouble kind of verbalizing why and how. But yeah, I guess it just seems more relevant.
Sure, that makes sense. As a random aside, with no connection to really anything, if you're looking at the front cover of this book, which I realized last week and forgot to bring up, and perhaps I'm somewhat of a rube for not noticing this earlier, not only does it look like a wall of server racks, but it could also look like you are standing between the twin towers looking up at them from ground level. I had that realization as I was staring at my copy of the book while we were recording last week, and then there was just no way for me to bring that up. So it just another cool detail. If you happen to possess a paperback or hardcover copy of it and you're reading along with us and haven't noticed it. But that being said, starting with chapter 16, Maxine comes back home and notices that a case of wine has been delivered to her house without her ordering anything, with a note attached to it, I would presume from Rocky Slagiat, explaining that she has also helped them divest from the Ponzi scheme with Bernie Madoff, and so they're rewarding her with an absurdly good quality wine. And she ends up feeling as though just something doesn't feel right. So she goes back over her notes and she notices a pattern, one in which this pattern shows that there is a paper trail between both the accounts at Hagawach and Hashlingers, where basically the same quantity of money keeps showing up as a shortfall in their books, and is being diverted to a different account. And she realizes that her old friend Lester has been taking money regularly out of the pipeline and paying himself directly, basically ripping off Gabriel Ice, which is very clearly not a good thing to be engaging in by any means. Certainly a dangerous thing. And she also notes that a good chunk of the money coming out of the, as Pynchon puts, soon to be defunct company is being turned into rials, which is the currency of Saudi Arabia. Looking at the conspiratorial elements of 9/11, this would be money that is likely being diverted to the Saudi hijackers. Once again, if you watch the Looming Tower miniseries or you read the book, Prince Bandar was the one who was sort of running the hijackers and was sort of diverting cash to them that had been converted through. Obviously, this works all back towards the Hawala systems that she discovered earlier in the book, but she is continuing to utilize her abilities as a fraud investigator to more accurately uncover how all of this thing is being fit together, but she still doesn't know for what purpose. Which is, again, just another great element of detection to show what kind of person Maxine is and what kind of, ability and brain she has as a character. We've mentioned it a lot of times in this book, but she is consistently one of Pynchon's smartest protagonists as far as not only her self-possession to investigate these things of her own volition, but also how she's able to uncover things so easily. There's a quote here on 173 that I really like, where it says, "So the other night at the karaoke joint, when he compared Gabriel Ice to a loan shark or a pimp, it was no idle figure of speech. Lester, endangered as a girl under a viaduct who's been holding out on the man running her, desperate for any kind of help, was sending Maxine a distress signal in a code that, shame on her, she didn't even bother to read. And the hard part is that she knows better, knows that beneath the high cap some scum scrapes created by the corporate order and celebrated in the media, there are depths where petty fraud becomes grave and often deadly sin. Certain types of personality get bent insanely out of shape. Punishment is violent, and an anxious, reflexive look at the clock on the wall. Immediate. This guy might not know how much trouble he's in." And I love that particular quote because it certainly paints what the rest of these 3 chapters are going to be, from a depiction of Lester as this person who's sort of running out of time in his scheme of skimming money from the person who's sort of financing him. And she ends up being exactly correct. He has no clue how stupid he's being, which is evidenced by the conversation that she then goes to have with him, where she calls him and explains to him, like, "Hey man, I was able to figure this out and I don't really have any special access. So Gabriel Ice also knows about it, and you gotta do something to try and get yourself out of the situation you've sort of put yourself into here." And so she ends up going to a place called Eternal September. And I can't think of a better person on this show to explain that joke than Will. I would imagine you're fully familiar with what Eternal September is a reference to, right?
I am, absolutely. It feels weird to be asked. Yeah, it feels weird to be asked to discuss Eternal September, being that my consciousness really came into being after the first call of Eternal September.
Yeah.
But basically, for all those who are not in the know, Eternal September is the idea that back when the internet was exclusively occupied by government institutions and colleges and universities, basically prior to the mid-90s, there was this weird kind of tide in terms of the kinds of people who would be on public bulletin boards, forums, the chat room. And basically what would happen is every September or, October, August, depending where you were in the world, people would suddenly start acting really stupid and start asking very silly questions because, all of these college kids were coming in, and they were all college kids, and they wanted to, come off as cool and savvy like everyone else on the internet was obviously coming across as. And so they wouldn't like actually sit back and try to gauge the vibe of any of the forums or chat rooms that they were entering into. And so there would be a bunch of rehashing of the same conversations and a bunch of breaking of social norms done with no ill intention, but in such great numbers that everybody hated to be in those public internet spaces during the month of, August through October. And basically circa between like 97, I think, and 2002, there was a chain of people basically declaring that we have entered an eternal September. Now with AOL, now with all of these competing for very early cable, but mostly DSL connections, now we have a bunch of people on the internet who are not part of the academic order, who are not part of this subculture of being, at the very least, people in contact with academia. You just have a bunch of people, whether they be business owners or accountants or just random folks who are bored and want to do something, and they hear that the internet has a lot of fun ways to entertain yourself. And suddenly there was never an end. And suddenly is a weird way to put it, but essentially there was never a way to end that kind of constant flood of people. Up through maybe the last few years, we've kind of reached a critical mass where there's going to be probably the same number of people entering the internet as leaving it, ignoring population growth. But yeah, that's what Eternal September is.
There was almost like a microcosm of it for anyone who plays like a lot of multiplayer, like online video games, of Christmas noobs, where all of the children who asked for this particular game for Christmas, the biggest thing that this applied to was certainly Call of Duty, would suddenly start playing it in January. And so in January, there'd be a giant flood of people who were just terrible at that game, or, were just absolutely cancerous to try and play with. And that I would imagine still persists to modern day. I don't know. It's been a long time since I played or was involved in any kind of video games, but it is an interesting phenomenon, the sudden influx of new people and how that brings about a certain degree of disorder.
Yeah, and then the name is not relevant really, but the same phenomenon happens in even gymnasium. People talking years,
sure.
January,
or the much meaner names for it, where suddenly everyone's making resolutions, and just a bunch of people who don't know how to use equipment or wipe down equipment are filling the weight rooms of the world.
Back when I worked out in like a public gym a lot, I kind of would just not go to the gym in January or February. I would just wait
a mess.
until March because it is such a nightmare every time.
It really is. Summertime was always like, that's when I would go because it's tend to have less people, but Jesus, yeah, January, February, it's like, it's a madhouse.
Yeah. Everyone just be honest with yourselves.
Or buy home workout equipment, because then at least you can see it and be like, oh yeah, I should use that.
Right. Yeah, I spent money on that.
Yeah.
Or start going in December so that you actually have the habit built before January and you don't get your expectations
right.
up.
Yeah.
Get ahead of it.
New Year's resolutions are kind of BS, unless you're doing them as soon as you have the idea, rather than let me go crazy until January 1st and then I'm done. It's like an addict getting high one last time before they go into rehab. So they have a conversation at Eternal September where really, and it's really kind of, there is a certain degree of sort of tragedy to that conversation, because Maxine is just earnestly trying to warn him and be like, look, I don't know why you thought this was a good idea, but you've got to find a way to make this right, because even if he is willing to accept the money back, he's going to eat your eyes out on the interest that he's going to ask for from this. Yeah. And Lester basically like just pleads. Well, first he starts from a standpoint of like, well, he stole the money anyway. I'm just getting a taste of it. And then kind of slowly through their dialogue back and forth, he eventually is just like, why does he even care? Like, I was like a nobody before this. You know, would he really be upset if it was $1.98? That's basically what this is in comparison to the amount of money that he has. And then the end of their conversation is great when they leave Eternal September, and Pynchon just writes, by which point they're breezing for the exit, Lester ahead of her like a feather in an air current, escaped from a pillow as if in some domestic dream of safety, which is just such a perfect sort of description of this sort of operative delusion that he's been working in up until now, of like, this isn't that big of a deal, but it is that big of a deal. And the consequences of how big of a deal it is are certainly the primary thrust of these 3 chapters. Does someone want to read the quote about the VHS tape on 178? Because I think that's such a great introduction to the next sort of phase of this chapter.
One thing I wanted to point out about the conversation they have is that it is odd to me that this is going ahead a little bit, I guess, but it is odd to me that Maxine doesn't draw a line between that conversation and Lester being killed pretty much immediately afterwards. Like the timing there, you know, like presumably Lester's been doing this for a while, at least a month, maybe a few months. And it just strikes me as odd that Maxine isn't more freaked out about it. Later on, I think in chapter 17 is when we find out that Lester died. Because for me, you know, if I have this conversation, if I find out that somebody is stealing money and then I have a conversation with them about it, and then like the next day they're dead, I would be pretty paranoid. And I mean, Maxine's shown to be pretty paranoid just kind of generally. But I do think it's interesting that it doesn't occur to Maxine that he could have been killed, at least partially because of the conversation, and or partially because like she herself found out, you know, maybe there's somebody observing her, like, you know, as like, you know, somehow is observing her laptop, is observing her online activities or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's been the case through the whole book. That's a good point. She is paranoid, but she's like intelligently paranoid, which perhaps, you know, this is like her motherly or Yenta instincts taking over, where she should be more cautious about it, but instead she just wants like this guy to be okay, in the same way that she might her kids if her kids were in the same situation, which is why she maybe is approaching it with like the naivete of like, just give it back, just give him the money back, whatever. And you know, that doesn't end up working out, I guess, is the easiest way to put it.
Well, I mean, it could also be a situation of this is something that's occurring outside of the scope of what she's used to, and so it's hard to anticipate what might happen as a result of what's going on. Like, she clearly knows that Lester's putting himself in some serious danger, but I think given her previous experiences, or you know, what we can infer from what we know of her, she's never dealt with something like on this scale before, and so I think it's kind of easy to assume that, like, you know, yeah, he's really in danger, but he's not gonna, like, he would, no one would kill him over this, you know, kind of an underestimation of you know, who's behind everything. But you know, it still kind of plays into her you know, her naivety and her inexperience in dealing with this big of a case.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up just before, right before conversation they had at Eternal September, Lester is thinking of throwing away his because he thinks there's a tracking chip in it. And I mean, not to say that, like, oh, if you don't understand, if you don't make these connections, you're an idiot. But in the context of somebody who's trying to rip off an employer who is as well connected as Gabriel Ice, you think there's a tracking chip in it? Or do you think maybe it's a cell phone which has always been able to be traced by, not necessarily by design, but inherently by design? And that kind of belies a certain degree of foolishness, the kind of foolishness that doesn't get called on as a bluff. And it just reminded me of the fact that, like, when we meet this guy, the first thing we really learn about him, aside from his... Oh, sorry, never mind. I got him mixed up with Felix Boingo. Never mind. But he's still kind of an idiot. And so it wouldn't be crazy for Maxine to basically think that, well, maybe he just got himself killed.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
he's reckless too. You know, we see
Yeah.
him, you know, in that argument at the bar a couple chapters ago. So yeah, he's clearly not. He seems impulsive and reckless. Yeah, I mean it's not. It wouldn't be completely implausible for him to have done something stupid enough to get himself killed in some kind of accident until she's able to, you know, put the pieces together and see what happened.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, the news broadcast that she listens to doesn't believe, like, says it might be a suicide, but then when they describe what happened to him, it's like, yeah, no, there's just no way
That's true.
that somehow that would occur. So it definitely is like one of those other sort of people getting suicided, like that guy who shot himself in the head twice. I can't remember
Mhm.
what journalist that was, but yeah, where there is a degree of naivete to the entire thing, of just sort of an acceptance of like the cost of doing business almost.
Yeah, yeah,
I think you're referring to Gary Webb.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, that's correct. That guy was definitely killed. No one shoots himself in the head twice. That's nuts. Played by Hawkeye in a movie adaptation of the case he was working on.
Really? Oh my god, I didn't even know that.
Yeah. The movie is literally called Kill the Messenger,
Oh,
which
come
is
on.
probably the least subtle title you can
Can't
come
do
up
that.
with for a movie about someone investigating a government conspiracy.
Who greenlit that?
I don't
That's
know.
a horrible name.
It's a great question.
That's Hollywood for you.
Jesus.
Like that, it's not for
Yeah.
It's a James
biopic
Patterson
of-
title.
Or they are very
Yeah.
true.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, or Dean Koontz, you know, in that realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, for a movie about a messenger who was actually killed, it
Jesus.
comes across as pretty callous. So yeah, Maxine goes home and she has something in her tells her that she needs to watch this Blackula Scream tape that she was given several chapters ago. And yeah, does someone want to read that quote beginning with "Yes, well"?
Yeah, I've got it right here. Yes, well, then there's the video cassette Marvin brought, sitting there on the kitchen table as if plastic has suddenly figured out how to be reproachful. Maxine knows she's been putting off watching it with the same superstitious aversion as her parents had to telegrams back in the day. There's a chance it could be business, and from bitter experience, she can't rule out practical jokes either. Still, if it's too unpleasant to watch, maybe she can try to claim as business expenses the extra therapy sessions that might result.
You have a note here, Cody, that you have an
Yeah.
irrational fear of unmarked
do.
VHS tapes.
Anyone who's watched Lost Highway should have this same fear. Like, the idea of a random video cassette showing up, there's no good situation that's it's not gonna be like an America's Funniest Home Videos, you know, best of thing or anything good. You're gonna get ringed or you're gonna get Lost Highwayed. Like something bad is gonna happen as a result of this. You're gonna see something you don't want to see, and you're gonna have to do extra therapy as a result of it. Someone who like had an extraordinary number of blank VHS tapes, most of which were full of old baseball games from when I was a kid, and then a bunch of videos of my friends and I skating. If any of them ever showed up on my doorstep, you know, just a blank unmarked tape, it's going in the garbage. I don't know what's on there, and I don't want to find out. I'll die in a week.
Is it just VHS tapes? Like if an unmarked like cassette or like
there is an
DVD?
ominous nature to VHS tapes that exists solely for that state of media. If it was a blank DVD or CD or a blank just cassette tape, fine, I'll put it on, see what it is, whatever. It's the VHS tape because there's that media exists around that specific type of media as a plot device for bad things happening to people.
Fair. Yeah.
I would argue it's not even irrational. You mentioned it there. I don't think any other piece of medium that you would like write at home and therefore would have a blank label. I don't think there's any other that I know of that is less like marked. Because like, sorry, I phrased that horribly. Basically, like a CD, people burn CDs all the time. They were incredibly cheap. They still are incredibly cheap, even though people aren't using them as much. you can buy 1,000 of them for like $15, and people would just burn them and throw them into their car before the days of the aux cord, and that was it. And the same thing with cassette tapes, like audio cassette. But
Yeah.
VHS tapes were big and they cost money. You didn't just do that. And if you did, if you were the kind of person who loved filming baseball games, you would write the baseball games and you would keep them in a collection. And if you're going to throw them out, you're going to throw them out together. You're not going to just throw out one of them, and you're not going to throw out one unlabeled cassette tape in like the middle of nowhere unless there's something on it that nobody else wants to see.
Exactly.
The best case scenario is something like someone going through a rough divorce and throwing out their wedding tape, but that's going to be labeled.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, wedding or anniversary or whatever. Like, if you get a blank VHS tape on your doorstep, it's going to be someone filming from the outside of your house and coming in and showing you killing your own spouse. I've seen Lost Highway enough times to know that that's all that's going to come of it. That's it. End of story.
That's fair. I don't think that's necessarily an irrational fear. An irrational
and then Robert
fear.
Blake shows up at your house at a
Which
party
would-
and makes you call yourself.
That's an even worse scenario to have happen. An irrational fear would be what I told my neighbor last night when we were watching the Icelandic film Godland, where I said, I have a genuine irrational fear of that one day I'm going to be in a situation where I have to cross a river on a horse. And that's one of the scariest things to me, is being in that scenario. And then almost immediately after I said that, one of the characters in the film died by falling off of his horse into the river. That is something that I know I am not prepared to handle.
Well, I feel
When did
better
this
now.
happen?
What did you say?
When did that happen? When did that exchange in the movie viewing happen?
That happened last night. I want to say 45-ish minutes into the movie.
So I watched True Grit last night
Yeah.
for the first time.
There's also a
Fun,
river
though.
crossing in True Grit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not
Yeah,
a tragic
it's
one,
something
but yeah.
It's something I never want to be put in the situation of. If for whatever reason I am ever on a horse and we come to a river, I'm just gonna turn around.
Nope.
Be like,
Terrifying,
I've had
yeah.
enough of this journey.
All right, guys. You guys go get the adventure. Go get the treasure. I'm out.
I'm not doing this. This is as far as I go.
Get him build himself a canoe.
Yeah. So what is on the tape is indeed, as we said several episodes ago, not Scream, Blackula Scream, but a home recorded video, first of somebody just in their car, and then they're driving out towards the Hamptons, and then they drive up to like a real, I guess I'll say ratty little shack somewhere out in the Hamptons, and what follows after that is a videotape of a threesome between two people that Maxine is not familiar with and Felix Boingyo. What do we think of this whole sequence? Do we have any thoughts on it?
This is, when I mentioned earlier about the horror writing, this is, for me, this is an example of that. And it again goes back to that Lost Highway kind of thing. There's a scene almost exactly like this in Lost Highway, up to a point, the whole driving up to the shack out in the middle of the kind of deserty, beachy area.
Yeah.
And so, like, when I read scenes like this, there is a certain sort of ambient horror that lies behind that. And again, it goes back to the unmarked VHS tape, and there's such an ominous nature to that there's always a portent of evil that exists behind whatever the hell is playing on the tape.
Mhm.
So, throughout all of this, like, there is a very unsettling nature that kind of exists in the background of all of this, and it just adds such a bizarre, it adds an unsettling layer to what is already a very bizarre scene that we see play out on the tape, and I think it's so effective in the way that it's done and the way that it's structured. And is it Felix? I thought it was Vip on the tape.
It is Vip. I'm not sure.
It's
I think
Vip, yeah,
she
just found it.
speculates that Felix is the one filming it. I think.
Yeah, but
that's
Vip is
correct.
the one that we
Yep.
see. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
One thing about
So-
the Vip stuff, she kind of mentions Vip as if you're supposed to already know who he is, which I found kind of weird. I don't know. I was kind of confused by that.
Well, it's weird because he has been introduced in such a sideways fashion that really he isn't a character. He's just a name.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so to have this very
Yeah.
intimate view of him is very disconcerting.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah. He really got a couple throwaway lines, and that's just sort of it. And then the next time we see him is this.
Yeah.
And yeah, to your point, Cody, of like bringing up the ambient kind of horror laying in the background, I feel like Pynchon sets that feeling up really well with this quote on 177, where it says, "She's relieved in a way to see it isn't going to be the Hamptons of legend, at least. She has spent more time there than it's worth. This is more like Fringe Hampton, where the working population are often angered to the point of homicide because their livelihoods depend on servicing the richer and more famous, upon whom they must never miss a chance to suck. Time-battered houses, scrub pine, roadside businesses, no lights or decorations up, so the winter here must be in the deep and dateless vacancy after the holiday season." Like, that paragraph begins with, she's relieved, but then proceeds to describe in 3 sentences nothing but horribleness about what she's actually seeing and what the actual sort of contextual living environment for where it's being recorded is, which really, I think, coats the rest of this in that feeling you're describing.
Well, it's very Lynchian to bring him back into this discussion. This is this mix of horror and absurd comedy is so David Lynch. Because you go from that, you have that, and then the paragraph right after, the shot enters a dirt road lined with shacks and trailers and approaches what at first seems like a roadhouse because every window is pouring light. Like, and then you get this, psychobilly Elvis playing the Green Acres theme to the tune of Purple Haze.
A real band and a real song you can go listen to.
It really is. And then, the porn thing happens, and then that devolves into improv, and then, but like throughout all of it, there's still this undercurrent of just dread and unease that exists because of the way this whole scene has been set up. Going back even farther than that paragraph, like at the beginning of this little section where, again, we have this unmarked tape, and there's such a, like, this part of this chapter is so well done as just ambient horror. And that's the horror that I really like, and that Pynchon is so good at writing.
Yeah, and I love the close of kind of the tape where the camp stays on Vip. He turns to face it, resentful, reluctant. "Not too happy tonight, are we, Willie?" inquires a voice from behind it. "You noticed? You have the look of a man things are closing in on." Vip shifts his eyes away and nods, miserable. Maxine wonders why she ever quit smoking. The voice, something about the voice is familiar. Somehow she's heard it on television, or it's something close to it. Not a specific person, but a type of voice, maybe a regional accent. Where could this tape have come from? Somebody who wants Maxine to know about Vip's household arrangements? Some invisible Mrs. Grundy with a strong disapproval of threesomes? Or somebody closer? Say, more of a principal in the matter, maybe even a party to Vip's skimming activities. One of those disgruntled employees again? What would Professor Lavouf say beyond his trademark? This has to be a world off the books. Like, that whole closing is really great because there's the recorder saying that really ominous line about, you have the look of somebody things are closing in on. Then Maxine's immediate thought is like, I need a cigarette. Why did I ever keep smoking or stop smoking?
And channel surf. And to just like get your mind off of everything else and have something that's nothing to focus on.
But also just that closing quote of this has to be a world off the books. That concept of like, this is something that happens, but you're not supposed to see this. Like, it's supposed to be something that is completely off the grid that isn't to be shared. And so she just has to deal with like the innate horror of not just the fact that she watched 3 people smoke crack and then have a seemingly horrific threesome, but also the inherent horror of like, why did I watch this? Who wanted me to watch this? Like, what is happening here?
So, and that plays in this. This has been in the back of my mind. This plays into this VHS thing as the only medium for which this kind of works, because with a VHS tape, there you get right into it, right? Like you put it in the VHS, you play it. If it was a DVD, there's going to be a menu. There's going to be, all whatever bullshit comes up before that. So that breaks the immersion already. If it was like some YouTube video or something like that, you're still, there's the possibility of ads or whatever the case may be. VHS, like you are there and you're immersed from the first moment. If it's a blank tape, there is no setup to it. So it's just like you're there and you're in. You have no time to really settle yourself in and try to prepare yourself for whatever may be on here. Like you're just thrown into it, and I think that adds to this unsettling kind of nature of it. And then the fact that we end with Maxine having to have a cigarette and channel surf as a means of just decompressing from everything that she just saw. It's such a simple setup and a simple ending, but it is so effective at doing what it's trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing that I like especially about the channel surfing afterwards isn't just the line about it being like kind of a meditative sort of release for her, but also like what she ends up watching.
Yeah.
Question marks all over the place. So
Yeah.
Pinchon is denoting that this is like some like shitty California stuff, but with the sort of concept of like California as evil empire and the lines of like, you know, what better way to screw something up by bringing in a couple of Californian elements. It really adds something else to the fact that she stops and watches this program in particular, which is gotta be one of the most brainless things I've ever read from a standpoint
Maury
of
Povich level of
not even
awful.
Maury Povich, because they're just describing like wanting to have a nice time with somebody.
That's true, yeah.
Like it's like the fantasies that they're engaging in is just like
mundane
domestic like sexual relationships. But that is taking her mind off of like the innate horror of what she has just witnessed, which is a part of like an outgrowth of the greater conspiracy that she is investigating. So it is Pinchon directly putting it on the page of like, yeah, you know, we can just mix up some like dumb stuff out of California and that'll take your mind off of all of the horror that is actually going on, as long as you stayed glued to it, which she does.
Mm-hmm.
It does remind me a bit of the movie Southland Tales. I don't think any of y'all have seen it. I think I brought it up
I
before.
still haven't seen it.
I know what it is, but I haven't seen it.
There's a part in it where there's girls on a talk show talking very sexually at one point, which I do think it could be a reference to that, kind of an oblique reference to that. I have seen the movie described as Pinchonian, and it comes up on the Pinchon subreddit a good amount. It's probably a stretch, but I do think it's there's at least a similar scene in that movie to this scene in the book.
Sure. I do enjoy the inherent humor of the way that the characters' names are spelled. Tiffany being spelled Typhphani, and then Jennifer being spelled Djennyphrr. Which if you spent any time around some of the younger people currently out and about in the world, this is still an exaggeration of reality, but by ever decreasing degrees of realism. Some of the ways that names are being spelled for Gen Z and Gen A people is pretty wild.
Yeah, and it's you know, it's one of those things where you can sit there and you can really savor just how skilled Pinchon is actually writing those kinds of jokes, because there are 1,000 ways to make the joke that are offensive, whether in some kind of like, oh, all these stupid millennials naming their kids stupid things, or all of these suburban yuppies and these stupid things. But when you take it from like in real life, it would be like something like Ashley with with a Y and a GH and an extra H somewhere in there.
Right.
Like, but to have Jennifer, or no one's gonna be offended. I don't think it's possible. Which is not the most important. The equivalent joke is like, have any of y'all had any errand food lately?
Yeah, basically. That's a good point. So after Maxine watches that, she's gonna get ready for bed, and then she looks at herself in the mirror and screams, "Ah!" And she's put off by the fact that she's wearing a Knicks second color road jersey. And she seems particularly concerned by the fact that it wasn't a gift, but that she went down to MSG and purchased it herself. And just something about that really strikes her as being off-putting. And I love the description of it. There is also her mostly unavowed fascination with Latrell Sprewell and his history of coach assault. On the principle that Homer strangling Bart, we expect, but when Bart strangles Homer. It's just the concept that she loved a basketball player enough for the violence that he enacted on coaches that she bought his jersey and is now kind of horrified at the fact that she did that.
Yeah, Latrell Sprewell definitely had a kind of singular reputation in the 90s in the NBA.
Yeah.
I wasn't familiar with this. Do you want to expand on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe Cody could also probably talk about this. He was kind of the Draymond Green of his time, a little bit more of a scorer, less of a defender. I don't want to get into the weeds of the NBA too much, but I was just doing a refresher on the incident where I guess his head coach criticized him. Latrell Sprewell said, "Don't come
I think.
Yeah, Latrell Sprewell was like, basically, don't come at me, don't get anywhere near me." The coach approached him, and then Latrell Sprewell put him in a headlock and dragged him around. And then they were separated.
Dragged him over a table, I think, too. Like, it got pretty wild.
And Latrell Sprewell also punched him a little bit later. Latrell Sprewell also apparently punched a teammate earlier in the 90s and returned to the court with a 2x4.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he definitely problems. He had a reputation in the 90s as being, a violent kind of problematic player. So I do love that Maxine likes him as a player. I was also kind of obsessed with him as a kid just because I thought it was really funny that he did that in the same way that Pinchin seems kind of fascinated with him for having done that.
It is a fascinating concept. And I can't say there's many other players that are known for doing that.
They're few and far between. Yeah, I remember when that happened because that coach he used to be a coach for the Spurs. So that was a little connection to down here.
So the only way that Maxine, Will.
I just wanted to dissect the frog a little. Is the joke here with her being disgusted by herself and because of this jersey? Because she is still an NBA fan. Is it just the eternal hatred of the Knicks? Is that the joke?
I kind of think so.
Okay.
Which is funny now that they're doing really well.
Yeah, totally. But like people in New York hate the Knicks in an incredible way.
Yeah. Unless you're Spike Lee, and then that's that's the hill you're going to die on.
I feel like if you got Spike Lee in a room alone with a couple Zimas in him, he would also probably articulate a hatred for the Knicks that is similar to the rest of New York. Yeah, I think so. I think it's kind of
we'll never know.
This is true, unfortunately. I think it's kind of like the relationship between fans of the Jets and that team.
Yeah,
of just
no one really likes the Jets. They have dug themselves into a situation in which they have to say they do.
Yeah, but they suck and they're horrible and they never seem to get any better. There's a great exchange between Larry David and a Jets fan in an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, where I think it's Larry says that one of his friends is a fan of them and he committed suicide. And the guy said, well, he's probably better off, but the Jets should be prosecuted for murder.
Well, they have to deal with Aaron Rodgers now, so I guess that's their punishment.
That's true. Thank God he's not in Wisconsin anymore. So the only way that Maxine can really think of to further dull the edge of this evening she has is to go visit her psychotherapist, Sean. And I love the introduction of this paragraph where it says, Sean next morning is tons of help, period. It's just maybe one of the best jokes so far in this book. Where she articulates the fact that she can't get this whole situation with Lester off her head, out of her mind rather. She's really worried that something's going to happen to him, and Sean just kind of says, well, that's just sort of how the cookie crumbles, Maxine. really doesn't have much to give her. Although he does give the parable of the burning coal, which is a Buddhist parable or koan. What do we think about his retelling of this particular story to Max?
I thought it was hilarious. It's just like it fits his character so well. It like he hits the beats, but it's got that, like, it's so full of the Californication of it. Just him, I guess, understanding the concept, but not really the message necessarily. But he can at least get the point across of, like, here it is in its own kind of way.
Yeah, it's a really good illustration of how superficial his belief in any of this is.
Right. Yeah. As much as it can be called belief.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like you said, Cody. It's not, none of it's wrong. It's just everything about it indicates a real half-heartedness.
Yeah. It's not factually inaccurate. It's just, it's morally wrong for him to be telling it the way he's telling it.
It
Yeah, and
reads
he
like he's
doesn't-
doing sides for an audition.
Yeah.
And he doesn't offer any like conclusion from it either. Like the last part of it, he lets go of it, and he doesn't let go of it. That offers Maxine like zero help in terms of her situation.
Yeah. It's
Well,
like his thing earlier about, like, what do? We just sit here. Okay.
Oh, I love her response to that. To build off your point, Luke, is just she goes, "Oh, I must have said something wrong."
Yeah.
Like as if this is a test that he's administering to her that she doesn't have the answers for.
But then he turns it around and he's like, well, maybe it was me. I don't know. You go figure it out.
Yeah, like he's the worst therapist.
I mean, seriously, I said it when we met Sean, and I kept my tongue. The I think that we've seen him,
Mhm.
but again, I must reiterate: why the hell is Maxine in, like, I'm my money? What is going on in her head that
I
this make anything?
don't know.
Or even
My earlier
in time?
Yeah, I mean, my earlier thought still stands for me, of just like she'd rather get blatantly scammed, given that she knows how to see through the fraud, than to get potentially scammed by someone who can speak, pseudo intelligently in a way that's more convincing. But I think the other thing, especially reading through this section, that potentially comes to mind is that in some ways, talking to Sean is kind of like talking to a rabbi. I don't know if any of you have talked to a rabbi before, but more often than not, when you go speak to a rabbi, they don't really give you anything concrete. They just kind of repeat questions back at you, and you're left sort of wondering what the entire interaction is meant to mean. And there's like a whole thought process in rabbinical schools that, just like everything else in Orthodox Judaism, dates back thousands of years ago as to why they interact with their, the members of their community that way. It's supposed to, prompt introspection or something like that. But it's obvious that Sean can't do that, but it's possible that at one time maybe she was more religious, and so going to somebody who kind of apes at the same thing to a significantly less effective or even helpful degree maybe it makes more sense to her than going to a therapist who is genuinely going to have a dialogue with her.
I mean, it could also be a sort of barb at the idea of therapists, especially at that time, where there was always that kind of running joke in like sitcoms and other TV shows and movies and whatnot, where the therapist isn't really necessarily, kind of like what you were mentioning with the rabbi, they're not really necessarily doing anything. It's a lot of just like, well, what do you think that means? How does that make you, like, that kind of, like, I think maybe Maxine just knows that that's what it is, and that's, what's the point in even trying to find someone else when she can use him as a sort of like, I can bounce ideas off of him real quick and I will figure this out, but sometimes I just need to verbalize it and, get that out there. But I think Sean is just kind of that stereotypical, like, there are no answers therapist, where it's, that line of just like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Who the hell knows? Go figure it out. I don't know. Maybe that is part of it.
Yeah, I would imagine there's some combination of factors as to why she feels compelled to go there.
Yeah, between those two, I mean, it's kind of funny because it's like a remarkable attempt if we were to take Sean's character and got into like a person full of hypocrisy. It's like he's trying to be like a living incarnation of koans that leaders like Dharma are well known for.
Yeah,
Just it's a lot like, but it at least Rise, you're actually like responding with things that have relevance, and the same with like
right. Yeah, they're trying to prompt you to think about it.
They're actually considering things and asking leading questions for a purpose, and the same with like a monk that you climb to the top of the mountain and ask questions of. But in this case, Sean is just wearing a Rolex and is just half remembered stories. It's just the degree makes it.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, we will find out soon enough that she is not the only person who's going to him for some reason. She's going to meet somebody in his waiting room. That being said, she decides afterwards to give a call. After watching the tape again, which why you'd watch? First of all, I will say, great of Maxine to be kind and rewind. She rewound the tape before she ejected it from her machine to watch television. But she does decide to rewatch the tape, and that makes her think that she should just go ahead and give a call to Felix Bongio. And when he picks up the phone, she just says, "Heard anything from Vip Epperdew?" And then he just says, "Don't expect to." And there's no elaboration on that for reasons that will become apparent in the next chapter. But she does ask for his phone numbers and wonders about whether or not it is truly Felix behind the camera. And she decides to give a call here. There's a quote on page 183 that I really love where it says, "One of the phone prefixes is up in Westchester." No answer. Not even a machine. But there's also a Long Island number, which she looks up at her crisscross at the office, already queasy with a suspicion. And sure enough, it's on the flip side of the Hampton. All but certainly the amateur porn set Shay and Bruno live in, where Vip has been making excuses to slide away to pay his dues to the other version of his life. The number brings an electronic squawk and a robot to tell Maxine, "Sorry, this number is no longer in service." But there's something strange in its tone, as if incompletely robotized, that conveys inside knowledge, not to mention "you poor idiot." A paranoid halo thickens around Maxine's head. If not a nimbus of certainty, ordinarily there wouldn't be money enough in circulation to get her inside bomb-throwing distance of the east end of Long Island. But she finds herself now dropping the Tomcat in her bag, adding an extra clip, sliding into working jeans, and a Beach Town appropriate t-shirt. And next thing she's down on 77th, renting a beige Camry, gets on the Henry Hudson Parkway, hassles the Cross Bronx over to the Frog's Neck Bridge, the line of city towers to her right, crystalline today, Sentinel, onto the LIE, cranks down the window and tilts the seat back in cruising format and proceeds on eastward. I mean, besides just being a great way to end the chapter, there is, again, that like additional degree of horror in the concept that somebody would pick up the phone and feign a like call disconnected or phone line not connected response, to the point where Maxine can just sort of tell that it's a person impersonating that. And then the fact that like that gnaws away at her enough that she's like, "Well, I guess I'm going to drive out there now." But doing so in a way that is safer by renting a car and, you know, sort of taking what she needs to protect herself is, again, you know, that combination of like really smart, A, kind of horror writing, but also B, with the hard-boiled writing, with C, including, again, the general intelligence that Maxine has and how she's going to go about doing her work. We have any other thoughts from chapter 16 before we move on to 17?
Sorry, just a question about the earlier line, I guess.
Okay.
during the VHS tape viewing where there's an aside about being having a habitual attachment to traveling on the LIE.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out what the point of that line is, I guess. Is it just like lies are a bad habit joke? Or is it about, the more general, highway kind of theories that Pynchon has sprinkled throughout his books? Or, both.
I can't say that I had anything for that line in particular.
Yeah, I didn't either. I'd have to think. I mean, I could see the latter, the highways kind of motif that comes up every now and then. But I don't know about the other one though.
Yeah, I guess I just struggled to connect it. And sorry, my dog has decided to come by the microphone and pant into it.
Aw.
Oh, how cute.
It is. But just like phrasing as, if the other two are supposed to be worth the long schlep from Westchester, hours on the lie, an addiction supposedly less negotiable than crack. Like even reading out the rest of the line, it just doesn't come together for me in any kind of sense.
Yeah, maybe it has to do something with the inner workings of the politics of Long Island versus like New York proper, as far as people going back and forth or something. I don't know. There does seem like there's something else being attached to that, but I don't think I'm smart enough to figure out what it is.
I think Pynchon's dad in the late 50s, early 60s was like head of like roads, or like he was some type of administrator in Long Island that had to do with roads and highways. I want to say that's neither here nor there, and I don't see how it's connected. But I did recently read about that this week when I was reading some Pynchon scholarship. So I could see it maybe being some type of reference to his dad or something. I don't know.
Yeah, if the listeners have any ideas, feel free to reach out to us on any of the platforms that we have available. Anything else anyone has from 16 before 17?
I don't
No.
have anything.
All right. She is going over to Long Island at the beginning of 17 and is finding herself listening to WYNY. And we get our next song input here. But once again, feels more adequately reasoned as to why it's here, because it's just the song she's listening to on the radio. Do we have any thoughts on the song as a whole? I didn't really have anything that I was able to pull away from that.
I don't, other than the fact that it took up 150 pages to get the first song, and then we get two within two chapters.
Well, he can only hold it back so long.
Yeah. The floodgates broke, and so now we're getting deluged.
Yeah. He broke the seal.
This is a bit random, and it's only really relevant to Gravity's Rainbow. But I was reading this week, and apparently, this scholar claimed that there's more lines of song in Gravity's Rainbow than there are pages, which is really interesting to me. And also, that's a lot of songs in Gravity's Rainbow, apparently.
Yeah, there's a lot of songs in Gravity.
There are just thinking, I can think of 3 or 4 that are just at least one leaf of just lyrics.
I could see how that would add up. Yeah.
But why? I just don't.
Well,
I don't care for it.
When we get around to Gravity's Rainbow, I will have strong defenses for them. In general, I'm with you.
I feel like a lot of the ones in Gravity's Rainbow are drinking songs. Like when the people are drinking, they're singing.
Yeah. Not all of them though. There's quite a few that aren't.
Yeah, that's very true.
I don't know. I can go either way on them.
Have an opinion, damn it.
No, I refuse. I will not leave my post in the middle of this fence.
I do love that this song in particular is a really, it's in general, if a song is in a book, especially a Thomas Pynchon song in a Thomas Pynchon book, there's going to be some symbolic resonance to what's happening. But this one is literally talking about things that Maxine has done in this book. And that's very nice. It's just fun.
Perhaps that's why she listens to this radio station. She finds some commonality with her experience in it.
And the irony compared to like some of the not so kind things that other Pynchon characters have said about country music, to have this, this woman from Manhattan who's 35, 40 in 2001, just funny.
Yeah, and enjoying it to the point where she is singing so loud that the people in other cars are looking at her with strange faces in adjoining lanes. I love that detail. Just she's so caught up in it that it can't help but draw attention. Eventually she pulls off the highway and she finds herself at a bar where she gets in and she orders twice awarded Best Beer in America, PBR. Those awards, I believe, were in like 1889 and 1890. And
Back when beer was good.
I can't with PBR. I've spent enough time in Austin that I can't.
It's good beer, Cody.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I see the people who drink it and it aggravates me.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I hate that bothers me so much, but it really does.
Oh my god. Yeah, I mean, the PBR factory is in Wisconsin. It's a big tourist attraction. I think I've just probably spent too much time in punk venues to not have a positive impression of it, but
it's a fine beer.
It's a fine beer, especially for the money. Yeah, that's true. It does have a hipster association for a reason. I don't know why the hipsters chose that one. There's probably more easily identifiable ones they could have picked, but she orders a long neck too, which is weird. I feel like PBR is only supposed to exist
always
in cans.
Yeah.
Like
Zemo on tap.
As Will said, it doesn't exist outside of the glass bottle. He tried to pour it into a glass. It just wouldn't go.
Yeah.
So yeah, she sits down at the bar, and as she's drinking, a guy named Randy, sitting down from the bar, immediately looks her up and down and realizes that she has a gun in her purse and that she's not a cop or military, but is certainly something. And so they have a fun back and forth, to where she asks about Shay and Bruno, the other two members of the threesome in the videotape, and she learns that they're pretty well known in this town, and pretty well known for being pretty terrible. And so she also learns that the sort of roadhouse or ramshackle little house that the thing was recorded in was actually burned down. And this happened a couple of weeks ago. So at this point, she is trying to get more information when suddenly a lot of other people in the bar start yelling out about how much they hate Gabriel Ice and land development in here. And there's a quote here that says, "Since last year, when the tech boom collapsed, most homeowners out here who took hits on the market have been defaulting on contracts right and left. Only occasionally can you find still echoes of the 90s golden age of home improvement, and the name that keeps coming up next to Maxine's surprise is Gabriel Ice. His checks are still clearing, Maxine supposes." Randy laughs mercilessly the way roly-poly folks do. When he writes them, renovating the bathrooms, Randy has found himself being stiffed invoice after invoice. I owe all over the place now. 4-figure shower heads as big as pizzas. Marble for bathtub, special order from Carrera, Italy. Custom glaziers for gold-streaked mirror glass. Everybody in the room chimes in with a story like this, as if at some point having had a fateful encounter with tabloid figure Donald Trump's cost accountants. ICE is now applying the guiding principle of the moneyed everywhere. Pay the major contractors, blow off the small ones. There's two notes that I have off the back of that. One, the line about like the golden age of home improvement in the 90s, and of all of these people starting to default on a bunch of, cost of improvements and housing stuff in particular, is really part of the precursor to the housing crash that would come 7 years later. Mm-hmm. Is really what Pynchon is kind of getting in here, is that a lot of people suddenly had a lot of money in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, and they were doing all this work on existing houses and also, getting signed up for predatory subprime mortgages and everything, which led to the collapse. A lot of people, lack of research or not, have an impression that it was mostly people who were just sort of defaulting on their mortgages. It was also a lot of people who did just take out a second mortgage on their house or spend way too much money on paying for home improvement stuff that also lost their houses and all of that as it came to pass in 08. So the kind of beginnings of that are already starting to happen as this, economic bubble has collapsed. And then the second note that I had from Donald Trump's cost accountants, that particular reference, people in New York have hated Donald Trump for a really, really long time. They have been way ahead of the rest of the country, aside from the people who are really into that guy, in hating him, because this is exactly what he used to do. The way that he, would build all these insane construction projects or like finance his company beyond what he actually could afford was that he would just hire a bunch of contractors who couldn't afford to take him to court. And so when they finished their work, he just would not pay them, and then they would not have any recourse to actually be able to get the money from him. And a lot of these contractors just went bankrupt. And this was just sort of a thing that everyone knew Donald Trump did in New York, and so he's been reviled there for a very, very long time. And so it's just another case of him taking like a real element of history and then adding in this additional prospect of like these yuppies are beginning to steal these concepts, and this way of wealth hoarding is really what it is. And kind of ripping off the 1%, so to speak, of the country is beginning to trickle down to new players in the financial world, or new players in the world of the freshly moneyed. It's just really great stuff for him to include here from a standpoint of not only table setting, again, New York as a character and some of the political stuff that goes on in New York, but also just the time and place that the novels is operating in.
This is a great moment for me to introduce my crazy paranoid theory that this book is actually a roman à clef about the cultural fall of Tim Allen from his previous heights as a beloved everyman to now known as a strangely political cocaine addict. But more seriously, I did want to mention that the gold streaked mirror glass is one of those things that is so much like the kind of thing that a yuppie in the Hamptons would have put in their house, but also so horrible, just a horrible idea on every level. And it's funny to look
stupid,
just to think about those kinds of things.
It's like when you see photographs of Donald Trump's living room, or if you've seen the movie The Devil's Advocate, there's a scene where Keanu Reeves is speaking with a client and they recorded it in Donald Trump's living room, so you can also see that there's nothing about that architectural style, whether you're a WASP or a yuppie, that feels comfortable or like you can live in it.
It's
like
opulent for opulence sake. That's it.
Yeah, the only way that you can dress appropriately for that setting is if you have like old school, like 18th century aristocracy, like robes and costumes. Like you just look way out of place. Like you couldn't wear a t-shirt in Donald Trump's house. Like it would feel incredibly weird. Let alone even if you're just wearing a suit. Like that would feel weird. Same thing with these stupid, like, yuppie-ified sort of home improvement projects like you're talking about, Will. Like, it's dumb, but it also lends this weird, sterile environment to the actual living situation, which, when you go back to the introduction of Talus a few chapters ago, would explain why she's constantly dressed like she's about to go out for an evening on the town, because that's the only way that you can look appropriate in that kind of an environment.
Yeah, you have to dress like a cartoon character villain, like an old Disney villain.
Yeah, like you're like Cruella de Vil.
Yeah. And it's no wonder that the people who live in those kind of houses end up fucking insane, because like just being around that kind of decor is enough to drive a person mad. Like I understand people's kind of, obsession with wanting, watching the shows about, the rich and famous houses and all that. I would fucking hate to live in a house like that. It would drive me insane. Like, there is no level of comfort that can be had in rooms like that.
No, not at all. It's very confusing. To do a brief aside on your Tim Allen line, back in the day before Joe Rogan lost his mind, he told a story once about Tim Allen going to the Comedy Store when he was trying to get back into stand-up prior to him becoming the weird, strangely political guy he is. And he did like a 15-minute story about crashing his Ferrari.
Jesus.
And apparently, according to Joe Rogan, he like took him aside afterwards and was like, "Hey man, don't tell a 15-minute joke about crashing your Ferrari when people assume that you're the guy from Tool Time with Tim Allen and Home Improvement." He's like, "That's just not gonna play in one of these audiences at all." Just to show that his disconnection from reality started long ago, before the cocaine and the reactionary politics.
Well, and just to extend beyond the taste thing, just so in case people aren't aware, Carrara marble is extremely expensive, and it's not just expensive because it's like, oh, it's a rock that comes from one part of the world. It's expensive because it breaks down as you use it. It is a form of marble that's incredibly fragile, and so when you see people's like countertops made out of it, it's basically just saying, yeah, I don't care about the fact I'm using this resource in a way that will inevitably stain it, that will inevitably destroy it. I am using it for the sake of showing off that I can destroy it, in kind of the same way that the gold veined mirrors. You can't put like gold veins in mirror coatings without having that essentially create an inherent vice in the design of the mirror. It will start to corrode far more quickly because of that aberration, even though gold is, fairly sterile as far as metals go. But the idea of making an entire bathtub out of Carrara marble, first of all, an insane amount of money. Second of all, it will be destroyed within like 5 years because of the nature of the material.
But if you can afford it once, you can afford it twice.
Exactly.
Unless you're a .com guy.
Unless you're a .com. This is more of like the Bluths kind of situation. Like that's some Arrested Development shit.
Yeah, definitely. The entirety of the bar seems to believe that Gabriel Ice has had a hand in burning down Bruno and Shay's place. And so Maxine, in inquiring about it, she gets sort of two answers. One is that Gabriel Ice might like to be the kind of guy who doesn't want to consider himself part of the Hampton elite, prefers to kind of be out on the fringe or the cheatin' side of town, as a reference to the Eagles here, by one bar patron goes, to kind of reconnect with who he used to be, quote unquote. Another patron suggests that instead he was also going out to Shay and Bruno's to engage in threesomes, but may have been recorded and was being blackmailed, which gets to the idea of perhaps why this videotape was recorded in the first place, as a sort of blackmailing operation that Shay and Bruno were engaging in, potentially with the help of Felix, if that is the person who's recording, or whatever the case may be. And so, as a result of that, Maxine decides to go and decide to visit the wreckage, and her friend Randy decides to give her a ride. And so the two of them decide to go out to a neutral point, switch cars to get together into Randy's truck, and also potentially give a cover for why they might be doing it. And then they head out to Gabriel Ice's place, which is out on the Montauk Point. There's another great quote here on 190 that I really love. Does someone want to read that paragraph beginning with "they continue out to"?
I can.
Okay.
They continue out to Montauk Point Lighthouse. Everybody is supposed to love Montauk for avoiding everything that's wrong with the Hamptons. Maxine came out here as a kid once or twice, climbed to the top of the lighthouse, stayed at Gurney's, ate a lot of seafood, fell asleep to the pulse of the ocean, what wasn't to like. But now as they decelerate down the last stretch of Route 27, she can only feel the narrowing of options. It's all converging here, all Long Island. the defense factories, the homicidal traffic, the history of Republican sin forever unremitted, the relentless suburbanizing, miles of mowed yards, contractor Howard Pan, beaver board and asphalt shingling, treeless acres, all concentrating, all collapsing into this terminal toehold before the long Atlantic wilderness.
This is another example, I feel like, of just how good Pynchon's writing is in these 3 chapters.
Yeah.
Of not just only describing the kind of environment and what it should be, but also sort of what it does represent with the shadowy stuff around, Montauk Point and Camp Hero, but also with all of the sort of Republican sin, as she puts it. Just a really excellent stuff by Thomas Pynchon here. So the two of them decide to after switching cars, drive out there. And Maxine looks over the house. It's a modern or a modest rather 10 bedroom. What you would do with 10 bedrooms, I don't know. But that's what he's got. And after describing some of the stuff in his house, there's also a line here: over the tops of the trees rises a giant old-time radar antenna from the days of the anti-Soviet nuclear terror, soon to be a state park tourist attraction. That is describing the old satellite radar dish that still sits above Camp Hero. It is a public park now. It is a tourist attraction. The building is shut down, so you can't get into it. It's all blocked off. But it was a gigantic, it's a huge radar dish that you can definitely see from everywhere. But it's particularly relevant because it's very close to Gabriel Ice's house, which we'll get to in a second. The two of them make their way in there by making a feign that they're here to work on something in the bathrooms, and they're just sort of allowed in, and there seems to be a veritable chorus of other contractors just doing random stuff in this house. Meanwhile, no one's actually living there, which is a great sort of, again, depiction of this wasteful spending by the nouveau riche. The idea that there's this house that, it has all this money going into it, but the actual occupants of it are really just the people working on it, and they're all working on it really for no personal gain, because as we've now learned, Gabriel Ice is probably going to rip all of them off. But we then decide to go into the wine cellar. Randy just starts stealing wine. I love that that's his first inclination. But we also learn that all of the wine is kind of crappy wine. It speaks to the same desperation of Gabriel Ice not belonging in the sort of social strata that he's in, that he doesn't know what kind of wine to procure. He doesn't know what kind of wine to have in his cellar. He doesn't know what's actually valuable, what's worth actually keeping in a bottle, to the point where Randy's well, I could maybe cook with this, but he's not going to drink it. I think that's another great example of Pynchon telling the reader that Gabriel Ice was picked by the WASP apparatus or the Defense Administration and the intelligence industry for this role, rather than him actually knowing how to be one of these people. And there's just these little cracks in the foundation that seep through now and again like that. It's a great detail there. And as it happens, she discovers a door in the wine cellar. And, as you do, you investigate doors.
Always.
Always, yeah.
What is going to be behind it? Nothing.
It's going to be a closet with more bad wine.
It's just Beanie Baby storage.
There you go. Yeah, that's where all the Beanie Babies are. That's where Virva McElmo keeps her Beanie Babies. Is Gabriel Ice's wine cellar. But this one's locked, and after trying a couple different codes that she got from Reg's investigator, one of them opens, and she decides to go inside. And there's a line in here that Pynchon has that says, unless she's turned around somehow toward the abandoned airbase with the big radar antenna. I believe this is there to indicate that is the direction she's now headed in, that Gabriel has deliberately built this underground section of his house to connect to what used to be Camp Hero. And certainly the hallways and the track lighting and all of the stuff that Pynchon describes in here does point to the fact that this is, this is a government installation of some kind, or at the very least not meant for, habitation by the Ice family. This is something else entirely. And there's just a lot of to read through this whole description obviously would take more time than it's worth for a podcast like ours. There's a lot of details in here that, again, like Cody said, point towards the inherent horror of this section. Like the fact that it smells like bleach, which means like it's been recently like scrubbed down. There's like weird rooms where it seems like you could keep somebody. Recessed track lighting is never a good indication of anything, as far as I'm concerned. And she just sort of keeps going deeper and deeper into this corridor. Bunch of the doors are shut and locked. And it's just, this is some of the best writing that I think Pynchon has done in any of the books that we've read, just from a standpoint of describing not only a place in like pretty picture perfect depiction for the reader, but also in this like genuinely horrible, like as soon as you know what the place looks like, Maxine should not be there.
Yeah.
That her first response should be to turn around and leave. But she decides to keep going further. She finds another stairwell that descends even deeper into the place that she's now discovered. To kind of go back to the discussion when I first brought up like the Montauk Project and all the weird stuff that is supposed to have gone down there, there is a theory that Camp Hero had a massive underground lab of some kind where the Project Artichoke stuff happened, where the Project Monarch stuff happened, where all the like crazy conspiracy stuff related to Montauk was done. You can still find Reddit posts and other internet sort of ephemera of people going out there and trying to find the tunnels. This is something that people have postulated for a very, very long time within conspiracy circles online. So again, all based in the reality of what a lot of people online have speculated this particular place is, and it would make sense that potentially as a staging ground for the planning of everything with 9/11 and Gabriel Ice's involvement with it, that they would utilize something that was already there. But it's likely that other things are also there. And then there is a really, really creepy paragraph on page 194. Does someone want to read that quote starting with "oh shit"?
I've got it.
Okay, well.
Oh shit, what's this? At the next landing down, something's poised, vibrating, looking up at her. In this light, it isn't easy to say. She hopes she's only hallucinating. Something alive, yet too small to be a security person. Not a guard animal, no. A child? Something in a child-sized fatigue uniform, approaching her now with wary and lethal grace, rising as if on wings, its eyes too visible in the gloom, too pale, almost white.
So she decides to get out of there, but what do we think of this thing in the hallway? This thing on the doorstep?
There's two things that came to mind when I was reading this section, and I first of all, I this is one of those. This is almost like a precursor to like liminal horror.
Yeah,
which
you're right about that.
Wasn't really. Yeah. Which wasn't really a big thing at this time, but the two other books that this made me think of, as far as the disorientation and the intentional kind of confusing layout of everything down here, is very House of Leaves. And then this creature encounter in here immediately made my mind jump to Annihilation and the whole Southern Reach trilogy. Just that kind of, off something in the distance. What the hell? It could be anything, any number of things, and it's, whether it's, dangerous or not, or even if it's real or not. That's the two things that came to my mind immediately when that particular paragraph came in.
Yeah, it was supposedly an aspect of the Montauk Project. I think Kate went over this. That like human experimentation on children, which that brought that to mind. That this might be some kind of child that's been altered in some way, or maybe even the ghost of a child who was experimented on. Somebody on the Reddit subreddit group read posited that it might be some type of hologram or something, which also I think is plausible. Maybe not super there in terms of like textual details that support it, but besides, like the fact that the thing seems to almost levitate or fly, different stuff like that does kind of point to it perhaps being an optical illusion of some sort. Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of no keywords are coming to mind, which is frustrating because I've been searching. But it brings to mind some vague impressions of like some ufology theories about like a specific alien race, and I wish I could remember like what they were called. But it reminds me a lot of there's one that's supposed to be like, oh, these were the angels. That this kind of reminds me of in kind of tone, the way that they're talked about in stories.
Kind of like Arthur C. Clarke in Childhood's End.
Well, I haven't read that. Probably
you
much
should.
dumber.
It's probably much dumber, yeah, but same idea.
Yeah, I just don't take the ufology stuff too seriously. No offense to anybody who does. So I just don't remember any of the names for these things. But it's really reminiscent of a lot of those things, given the amount of Project Montauk UFO crossover stuff.
Yeah, a lot of it. Yeah, Luke is correct. In that one of the theories around Montauk and the lab underneath is that there was child experimentation going on. Everybody's favorite limited hangout show, Stranger Things, is based off of those conspiracy theories. So the 11 stuff is certainly based on the conspiracies around Montauk. Yeah, the book has a theory for what it might be that we'll get into in chapter 18. But there certainly is no clean way to describe or I think contextualize what it is. I think it's entirely possible that it is there, more as a literary device to explain the danger of the surroundings that she's in, and to illustrate the level of evil that Gabriel is up to. And in that context, it would make sense why it's compared to Azrael, as we get to in chapter 18 here in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But definitely some of the most effective writing in the book from a horror perspective. But it isn't completely horrifying, because Pynchon still includes his humor by having her say, "Okay, Air Jordans, do your thing,"
stuff.
And she turns around and runs away.
Yeah.
Which the fact that she apparently said that out loud is rather funny to consider.
It's very Inspector Gadget of her.
Yeah, very true. Go Gadget Air Jordans. Yeah, Cody.
Did anybody else? I got the feeling reading this whole section with Gabriel Ice's house, like that, and this could be my crazy conspiracy corner time here. But it felt very much like the house was almost set up as a sort of representation of the surface web and dark web. We have the entryway where it talks about on 191 at the very end. How could there be secrets here? Drive-through kitchen, state-of-the-art projection room, everything in the open, no passages inside the wall. No hidden doors, all still too new. What could lie behind a front like this when it's front all the way through? And then obviously she goes into the sort of deeper pseudo-restricted area that she finds herself in, where we see all this evil and this horror and the things that are potentially happening down here, and the darkness, literal and figurative, that exists down there. Given the nature of the book, felt very much like a representation of those things, the surface web of this kind of facade of like, hey, look at all this cool, neat stuff we have here. But down here is all the creepy shit that no one wants to talk about. No one's going to be able to access unless you have the right authorization to get in here. And even then, it's all fucked up.
That's really smart. I'm surprised I have not seen anyone else posit that as an understanding of his house and what's beneath. That makes a lot of sense contextually for the book.
That did kind of occur to me. I mean, I was having trouble putting it into words, but that concept, yeah, I do love that concept, and I do think it's in there.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So Maxine runs out of the basement, runs back into the cellar, and then meets back up with Randy, who is completely clueless as to the horror she's just experienced. And then they decide to go back to their cars, and then she gets out of there as soon as she possibly can. And it's not before she gets a chance to hear another song by Drulin Floyd Womack, which is a reference to one of Pynchon's earlier novels, where there's a song in there from him. I can't remember which book it's in.
It was Inherent Vice.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So again, another fun detail of just how, again, it seems all of his books lie in the same kind of universe or alternate history of the United States. And then we get another dream. A lot of dreams in this book and in these chapters. This time, I'll just read it out here. It says, that night she dreams the usual Manhattan, though not exactly. She has visited often in dreams, where if you go far enough out any avenue, the familiar grind begins to break down, get wobbly and interwoven with suburban arterials until she arrives at a theme shopping mall, which she understands has been deliberately designed to look like the aftermath of a terrible third world battle. Charred and dilapidated, abandoned hovels and burned out concrete foundations set in a natural amphitheater, so that 2 or more levels of shops run up a fairly steep slope, everything sorrowful rust and sepia. And yet, here at these carefully distressed outdoor cafes sit yuppie shoppers out having a cheerful cup of tea, ordering yuppie sandwiches stuffed full of arugula and goat cheese, behaving no differently than if they were at Woodbury Common or Paramus. She is supposed to be meeting Heidi here, but abruptly finds herself at nightfall on a path through some woods. Light flickers ahead. She smells smoke with a strong toxic element, plastic. Drug lab fixins, who knows? Comes around a bend in the path, and there's the house from the Vip Epperdude videotape, on fire. Black smoke in knots and whirls, battered among acid orange flames, pouring upward to merge with a starless overcast. No neighbors have been assembled to watch, no sirens growing louder in the distance, nobody coming to put the fire out or to rescue whoever might still be inside. Not Vip, but somehow this time, Lester Trapes. Maxine stands paralyzed in the jagged light, running through her options and responsibilities. The burning is violent, all-consuming, the heat too fierce to approach. Even at this distance, she feels her oxygen supply being taken. Why, Lester? She wakes with this feeling of urgency, knowing that she has to do something, but can't see what. So just like last time, what are our thoughts on Maxine's dream?
It does kind of remind me of the aftermath of 9/11 in New York City, where what, like I like parts of the city would have been covered in like asbestos and different stuff, and it would have kind of resembled a war zone in some ways. That's really all I have, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd kind of picked up on the 9/11 thing too, especially with the description of the smoke coming out, and I don't know that I have any insight into any kind of connection to anything else. It's a beautifully written passage.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, it may be my favorite of this whole 3-chapter run here. But yeah, I didn't really make any connections myself.
I think it's really clear that it's you're looking at the arugula and the goat cheese sandwiches as a symbol of as we've referenced so many times, yuppification, and the way that all of this celebrity really ruined Tim Allen's mental health, and the way it pushed him towards crack addiction,
Tim Allen.
as symbolized by the plastic burning smell, which, as I'm sure many of you know, crack is often full of plastics due to lazy lab protocols. No, I don't have any deeper theories about it. It does seem to me like one of the most straightforward, not in like there's nothing to be mined here symbolically, but in the sense that this is what dreams are like.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah,
this is like not a fever dream. This is not like a dream that's there as a conceit. Although clearly it is, it's in a novel, but it feels very much like a dream that anybody could have if you abstract some of the specifics.
In the same way that The Sopranos excelled at accurately depicting what dreams are like. so too do these passages. My sort of notes that I took on this section are that it's interesting because the dream is somewhat similar to the one in chapter at the end of chapter 17 here. It's pretty similar to the one earlier where Windust is speaking to a bus full of people, except instead of like actively going away from a danger, it would appear as though the danger has already happened. Like potentially whatever was going on in the Windust dream has now already taken place. And what I think is most interesting about the yuppie part is that the yuppies are depicted in the chapter as just relaxing and eating along the same sort of consumerist lines that potentially would have existed in prior to whatever Armageddon has taken place. And so if like you look at this within context of the dichotomy that Thomas Pynchon has been drawing between the yuppies and the wasps so far in this book, then you can really see that potentially this aspect of the dream is likely a depiction of the fact that the yuppies refused to carry the torch of power on from the wasps in the way that they were supposed to. Like if the wasp apparatus is eventually going to have to be turned over to a new generation because all these people are getting older and dying, then the most logical next group of people it would have been given to are the people that we identify as the yuppies. However, they were too invested in the trappings of wealth, all the stuff that we've already talked about with Gabriel Ice and some of the other stuff that's been brought up in previous chapters, to care about the power that they were supposed to have or were supposed to have inherited. So as a result, they just continue to dine and lounge in the aftermath of the destruction that was supposed to be something that they were potentially going to be involved in bringing about, but has instead been brought about by their, quote unquote betters, because the wasps are still in control of these different levers of power. The wasps, then the apparatus they operate in with the intersection between the Defense Department and the intelligence apparatus, they brought about the end of history, and their children couldn't care less. They're just happy to eat their arugula and goat cheese sandwiches. And so when the dream shifts to the burning of the house from the Eperdue tape, but with Lester inside, that seems to be that Maxine has the understanding now that the tape is meant for blackmail, likely within the same circle that Gabriel Ice is doing everything else in, and it is just part of something that Gabriel Ice can use to bring about the demise of somebody. But Maxine is aware that the person whose demise, not the tape, but that Gabriel Ice is going to bring about is Lester. And so the person burning in that house is Lester because she knows something is going to happen to him. And so it's going to be the result of something that he was a willing participant in the same way that on the surface, Vip Eperdue being a willing participant in the threesome is likely part of the reason why he is probably dead. Maxine essentially knows that he's doomed, same thing as Eperdue likely is, but there's nothing that she can do about it. She's arriving to a house that's already on fire. That's sort of the notes that I had from that particular dream.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I don't have anything I can add to that. That's
so yeah, she wakes up and she just kind of goes to work. I love the fact that that's kind of how people react to surreal dreams. Like we all have them. And then, we wake up and just pretty soon she's up to her ears in tax dodges, greedy little hotshots dreaming about some big score, spreadsheet she can't make sense of. And about lunchtime, Heidi drops her head in. It's just very clear that she understands that, like, I know how this particular game ends. I know how this movie ends, and I can't do anything about it. And so when Heidi drops in, Maxine feels the need to ask about the Montauk project again, to which Heidi explains that it's being turned into a sort of a public attraction, the old base, and that they're beginning to make Broadway musicals about it. And so she says, so nobody takes the Montauk project seriously anymore, you're saying. And once again, like we've already seen earlier with this stuff with Joey Buttafuoco, or the line about, bringing in some California elements to make the whole thing seem unbelievable. It is much easier to operate, a continuing conspiracy when there's some sort of public cover for it. And in this case, that public cover it might be the concept of these Broadway musicals, or the fact that the whole air base is being turned into a tourist attraction. Meanwhile, all of that evil is still taking place underneath, without anybody knowing or caring. And I love the way that this chapter closes, where it really like hits home what Pynchon is talking about here, of like, if you can create enough public stir around something from a joking manner or a less serious manner, then people sort of, go away from it, where it says, now it occurs to Maxine, does touristy mean detoxified? She knows people who go to Poland in the summer on Nazi death camp tour packages, complimentary Polish mad dogs on the bus. Out in Montauk, there could be fun seekers infesting every square inch of surface area, while underneath their idle feet, whatever it is, whatever's ice tunnel connects with, goes on. Yeah, just a great way to conclude chapter 17. Any more thoughts before we move on to chapter 18?
I wanted to highlight the response that Heidi had to Maxine when she talks about no one takes the Montauk Project seriously anymore.
Yeah.
And she says, Earnest Maxie, forensic as always. These urban myths can be attractors. They pick up little fragments of strangeness from everywhere. After a while, nobody can look at the whole thing and believe it all. It's too unstructured. But somehow we'll still cherry pick for the intriguing pieces. God forbid we should be taken in, of course. We're too hip for that. And yet there's no final proof of some of that. It isn't true. Pros and cons, it all degenerates into arguments on the internet, flaming, trolling threads that only lead deeper into the labyrinth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is such a summation of the internet in itself, like, and of this tendency, I think, for people, and it's only gotten like exponentially worse since 2013. Of people to take, and this I will also say that this applies not just to fringe conspiracy theories, but you could track this to almost any kind of analytical discussion at even people talking about books on the internet, on a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
This tendency to kind of take the bits and pieces that make your argument, or that give your argument a backbone or some sort of skeletal structure, and using that to build any kind of argument. And as you know, like I mentioned, this has gotten so much worse over the years. There doesn't even have to be any substance anymore. You can have this just hollow shell of an argument, but if you can just pick the right bits and pieces out of anything without any context in it anymore, you can have this idea or this belief that can then spread so quickly and frighteningly that it takes on this whole new life. And I think a lot of those kind of things tend to start out as a joke and then just get glommed onto by the right people and manifest this sort of life that they never would have had, never should have had, but now they do have, because enough people have bought into this. And I think that's a very prescient thing for him to have put in this book. And no, I don't think you put a line like that or a paragraph like that into a book and not know that it's, this is going to extrapolate 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and just keep getting worse until we, collectively can find a way to not have this tendency anymore, which I don't think will ever happen. I think humans are just hardwired to have this kind of thing. And the internet has made that problem within our brains just so much worse.
Yeah, no, I agree. I underlined that quote and I said, still true in the margins. Because it is. And like, especially to your point about how like germane a lot of it is now, where like it isn't about like, is the government doing something sinister? It's literally just anything. Like the best example of this I can think from recent history is like Starbucks got caught up in a bunch of controversy because the Starbucks union, one of the people who worked for them, posted a pro like Palestine tweet when the Israel Gaza stuff wasn't too crazy. A bunch of people assumed that was Starbucks, and so they started fighting with one another on Twitter, and a certain contingency started protesting Starbucks for being pro-Palestine and anti-Israel. And then Starbucks asked the union to take the tweet down via lawsuit. And then a bunch of people started protesting Starbucks as a result of being pro-Israel and anti-Palestine, and then the union sued them back and forth, and this whole thing spiraled into a giant flame war online for like 2 days over like a communication misidentification. Like it doesn't have to be anything important. It just happens.
Doesn't. It's people just are upset, and they don't even know what they're mad about anymore. It's just like I'm mad. Here's a thing. I'm mad at that. Oh well, that's done. Now I'm mad at that.
Yeah.
And it's maddening. It really truly is. Like I think the internet has this potential to, and I think we've talked about this, to have been a place of public discourse and idea sharing, and there was such a sort of utopian kind of idea behind it, and humanity's inherent nature just shat all over that as soon as possible. It's like the I can't remember the name of it. My son was just telling me about it the other day. The thing they just installed where people from like one part of the world could share video like in a public space with people in another area.
The portal.
The portal thing, and how it took like 5 minutes for people to fuck that up.
Yep. Yeah. Or Shia LaBeouf's "He Will Not Divide Us" thing.
Yeah. It just like it has absolutely brought out the worst in us, and
really
just no one can get over that.
It's pretty wild. It really is. But yeah, you're right. Very, very prescient of Pynchon, even for 2013. Like the verbiage he uses in that quote, like, you know, flame wars and trolling and all of that was well established by 2013. But putting it together into that idea of just like, you know, some of this stuff even has some truth to it, right? Like there's no, you know, there's no way to verify anything with Monarch or the Montauk Project. Like there's certain overlaps with like MK Ultra that are certainly proven, but it's fringe conspiracy stuff. But even you know, if or like Will talked about with acronyms, like if you can put enough like signal noise out there or enough alternative sort of search results or whatever into something, you can completely disguise it and derail it off from being anything honest, or anything sort of worth investing your time or energy into. Yeah, really great stuff from Pynchon there.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point of characterization because Heidi it's not like she's a moron in this story, but she is clearly not a very analytic person.
No.
But here you have her delivering essentially like all of the high-minded analysis that, you know, gets pulled out of like The Crying of Lot 49, but only centered on essentially internet conspiracy theories. And so it's in itself kind of an interesting instance of that obscurity, that methodology, I guess, if you want to put an agent behind it.
Yeah, completely. Very, very good stuff. Anything else from 17 before we move to 18?
Well, so I wanted to ask all of my elders, and as somebody who's you know, by the time I was able to conceive of really what Montauk was, basically the Montauk Project and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind filled the entirety of the cultural corpus as far as like symbolism with the name Montauk. So I just wanted to ask really quickly whether any of you much older people, as I'm just going to keep on.
This just got real personal.
You very old people.
I'm dying right now. Let's go. I don't have a lot of time.
You sacks of dust. Tell me, what did Montauk mean before those two things were the only thing pop culture associated with the name?
I don't think it meant anything. I don't think it really existed in my mind until around that time.
I think the stuff that mostly I was aware of had to do more with this supposed germ warfare lab that's off of Montauk Point. Like I think that has had a lot more history of sort of vibrant conspiracy theory stuff with it. And like there's the somewhat of a connection between that and the fact that it's just in the same region as like Camp Hero and all of the other sort of things that came up around Montauk. The interesting thing is that like there seemed to be, at least to my memory and understanding, that a lot of this stuff was largely existing in a novel. Like the Project Monarch stuff really got into the public consciousness because of a book series where it was brought up and analyzed, and so a lot of people started to extrapolate that out as being related to these like Montauk conspiracy theories. I can't say that I really recall any sort of seriousness being put into Montauk as an entity. I remember the stuff being talked about with like the creation of Lyme disease and all those other things at the island off of it, but it seemed like the relative seriousness with which it has been given by a certain contingency of chronically online people has happened in more recent history, rather than being sort of a legacy idea. Something that I think Stranger Things has not helped, but has rather enabled.
I'm sure I read in passing something about it when I was like 4th, 5th grade, and I was really into aliens and those kind of like fringe conspiracy things that all 4th and 5th grade boys are into, I think. So I'm sure at some point, all of them, I can speak collectively for all of them, having been one and having one. I'm sure that name sounds, I know it probably came up in one of my weird like alien stories that the government doesn't want you to hear anymore, or whatever they were called, that I can vividly remember the pictures from because they were really, really bad.
Yeah, I think if I had much interaction with it ever, it was listening to Art Bell talk about it.
Art Bell, yeah. I had my Art Bell time.
Which was more of a thing I listened to out of a genuine curiosity in how Art Bell could listen to the people who called in with such earnestness.
Yeah, like I never could take that show seriously, but it was always fascinating to hear him interact with people.
Yeah, like, you know, like him or hate him or believe in the conspiracies or not, there was something genuinely endearing to the fact that somebody would call him and be like, I'm actually Satan. And then Art Bell would just go, interesting. Tell me more
Satan?
about that. It's just...
What are you doing right now? What's up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I was at all aware of the Montauk Project or any of that stuff until I read this book about 10 years ago, and I think I Googled it. Maybe read about a fourth of the page of the like second or third result on Google, and then read some of it and got kind of bored and realized it was going to be a slog to get through the rest of it because it just all seemed like kind of, you know, crazy conspiracy babbling.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it seems to be a little bit too all inclusive in some ways and a little bit too like, yeah, wide ranging and stuff. I mean, I think you asked like what Montauk meant to us in general, and I mean, I wasn't really aware of. I think I was passively aware of Montauk being a location in New York State whenever I was growing up because I grew up in upstate New York. But the only I think I became aware of Montauk a little bit more whenever, this is not relevant at all, but there's a Brand New song. The band Brand New mentions Montauk at one point in one of their songs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much, yeah, that's like the only, you know, other than being passively aware of it and then it being mentioned in a song, that's basically all the awareness I had of it until this book.
Yeah, the only like personal experience that I had didn't come until I was in the punk scene when I was in a band. One of the ambient synth artists, which makes a lot of sense, later had a bit of a psychotic episode where he started claiming that he was one of like the artichoke monarch people who had been abused and had like been sent back in time to edit history through assassinations like over and over again, and started like an online blog where he was talking about his recovered memories. But that wasn't until fairly recently in the grand scheme of things.
All right. Well, I appreciate all of you going as far as you could into all that. But I guess I'll just have to find my own 80-something-year-old New Yorker to ask.
Yeah, right to Pynchon's agent.
And then just as a footnote, I guess, to all of this, just wanted to point out this is the first literal appearance of the Filofax, although it's been alluded to previously, and I think it's important that that's noted. It's very much a relic of the late 90s, early 2000s, and it's an important icon in the book.
For those who are not familiar, what is a Filofax, Will?
So a Filofax is a 6-ring binder, I believe, in the standard size. It's basically a trapper keeper for businesswomen, as it is like culturally held. I think is the way that it's viewed.
I'm sorry, that description just is blowing my mind right now.
A trapper keeper for businesswomen.
Because it's, I mean, they are essentially it's a.
It is. No, that's exactly what it is.
Well, I was just going to go into a little bit more like literal description for anyone who's unaware. It's instead of having the 3 rings, basically, they realized, hey, 3 rings makes it really easy to tear papers. So if you want to use a binder for like a calendar or an agenda or a journal, you need a different setup. So they did like 3 on the top and 3 on the bottom, and I think A5 is the standard size, so about. It is. About half the size of a letter piece of letter paper, and you could buy one that's just a binder where you can put papers in. You can buy them with like integrated wallets and like coin purses. You can find them with like full file folder attachments. It's a whole subculture.
But there's no Lisa Frank prints of them, so what's the point?
This is where I have to admit both that Filofax still exists and that I use one in my day job as a general manager of a cafe.
No, I just to be clear, they're very effective methods of organization.
They are, yeah.
They're a useful tool. I've considered buying one in the past. You're
not a businesswoman, though.
I'm not a businesswoman, and it just doesn't work. I'm not allowed, exactly. No, I just don't like binders. But yeah, they are a useful tool. So I'm not at all surprised that you use one.
You want to know how I ended up using one too? I used to use a 3-ring binder portfolio, and the pages ripped quite a lot.
Morphology is not phylogeny.
Oh, man, we need to get sponsored by Filofax.
Filofax.
Hit us up. Give us some binders, man.
I'm an avid user of your product. Oh God, yeah. All right. Chapter 18 opens up with Maxine putting on her news and traffic weather station WYUP. Yup. And they have a great slogan. You give us 2 minutes, you don't get it back. Which is a great parody of if you give us 60 minutes, we'll give you the world. What program was that? I can't remember the name of it.
Jesus, it's
like Newsnight or something.
It was
like
some New York news channel or something like that. I can't remember the name. It wasn't one of the big like 60 Minutes or something like that. It was like some New York City local news or something like that. Let me check. Hold on. Pull up the Reddit, not the Reddit, the pension wiki. WINS.
Yeah. Good old WINS.
You give us 22 minutes, we give you the world. That's what it was. Yes.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, great joke from good folks over there at WIU. This is where we learn that Lester Trapes, a well-known Silicon Alley entrepreneur, an apparent suicide, though police say murder isn't being ruled out. And then they immediately move on. Meanwhile, week-old baby Ashley, rescued yesterday from a dumpster in Queens, is doing well. So this is where Maxine has learned that Lester is indeed dead, and she's somewhat in denial about it, to the degree that she thinks that she sees him walking on the street and disappearing down with a random woman into the subway, and she's unable to follow them. But more curiously, he died at the Deseret, which, as we have learned, is partially owned by Gabriel Ice. So, good indication of who had him whacked, so to speak. But yeah, she sees somebody out on the street that she thinks is him. Can't prove it, but decides that after a shiftily insomniac night punctuated with dream clips, she then goes to speak to Sean again, where she tells this story to him about potentially seeing Lester alive and well out on the street. And Sean really blows this off in a way that feels particularly uncaring for someone that he is supposed to be a mental health professional for. Yeah, just his line of first, the first suspect is that your memory's going, but then when she doubles down, he just says, "Well, I guess it happens sometimes. Ordinary, unenlightened folks just like you." Thanks, Sean. It's real nice of you to say. No special gifts or Nathan. Will see through all the illusion just as well as a master with like years of training. And what they'll be able to see is the real person, the face before the face. We call it in Zen, and maybe they'll attach some familiar face to it. Sean, that's very helpful, thank you. But suppose it really was Lester. Well, he was walking in like third ballet position by any chance? Not cute, Sean. And then he responds with, what? Died? Didn't die? Made the news on WYUP? Got on the subway with some unidentified babe? Make up your mind. Just he's so bad at his job.
Yeah.
In every conceivable respect. Like the one time Maxine like comes there with something very specific that she needs support for, all he can do is just basically mock her. It's pretty sad. There is a particular conspiracy reading of this that I could go into that just feels very off base, but it's an interesting interaction between the two of them. More important though, she goes into the waiting room after the end of their session, and she sees someone that initially looks like Alex Trebek, but is not Alex Trebek. It is a man named Conkling Speedwell, which is perhaps one of the most absurd names in this book.
Yeah,
There's no part of the name that's good. Either he introduces himself as Mr. Speedwell or he introduces himself as Conkling, and neither of them are great, but it does feel particularly fitting for somebody who is a professional nose.
Yeah.
Oh, you almost made the same laugh. Yeah, again. So
I need to get a soundboard with that stupid ass laugh on it.
We learned that, Conkling is a man with a particularly hypersensitive sense of smell, and he basically just works almost as a private detective where people call him, and he smells a room or a person and is able to deduce things from it. And it seems as though that is enough for Sean to think that the two of them should go out on a date together, that they do somewhat vaguely similar work. We also learn that Sean has been trying to set up Conkling for quite a while. But Mr. Speedwell is able to accurately nose out what perfume Maxine is wearing. And I really just, their back and forth with one another is really funny in a way that helps to lighten the mood of like the last chapter and a half or so, or well, like the last chapter and the beginning of this one. Just the back and forth of like, sister steers an occasional client away, usually takes a small fee enough to cover his airfola bill, which he tends to bathe in, usual thing. In the nose business, you have your own perfume line, or he seems embarrassed. More like an investigative agency. A private nose. It gets worse. 90% of my business is matrimonial, which we know Maxine has the same like hatred for, but it's obviously the only work he can get, which is pretty funny. And then he describes what he does for people, and then he gives out a couple of names here in the line of nasal forensics. Moskowitz, D'Anzoli, a couple others, they specialize in that. The Pinch on Wiki notes that potentially Moskowitz is a reference to a real person. And I did some research as to who this person is. I went down like a little bit of a rabbit hole, but there wasn't much that I could pull out of it. It's likely a reference to a CIA agent named Stanley Moskowitz. In the 1980s, he was an intelligence officer for Russia and then Eastern Europe, and he worked as a liaison to Congress in that time frame for the work that he was doing. Then in 95 and lasting until 99, he was the CIA station chief in Israel. But Netanyahu, I guess, did not like him for undisclosed reasons. I could not find why he did this, but Netanyahu just decided to unmask him in the paper. Just put his name and his job in the paper, and so he had to leave Israel. Here's the interesting thing, though. After that, he became the CIA's senior representative to the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, which is a think tank for foreign policy. So he was working with the CIA and this foreign policy think tank in New York during 9/11. He retired in 2005 and then died in 2006, and he wasn't old. Stranger, I had to dig for any sort of like a cause of death or an obituary, and the only thing I was able to find for this guy is a singular obituary written by the Washington Post after he died that made a comment that Michael Hayden and George Tenet, who were the two CIA directors underneath Bush, called him indispensable and truly exceptional. George Tenet worked underneath Clinton and then the beginning of Bush's administration, and then Michael Hayden was the main guy for the CIA through the Bush administration as far as his CIA directors were concerned. I couldn't find a photo of this guy, even though after he retired from the CIA in like the less than a year he had left to live, he did a bunch of important work in like translating and making like Nazi documents public for sort of like general consumption to read about some of their records as it related to the Holocaust and everything like that. There's no pictures of this guy. His Wikipedia page is like super empty. Just a very strange thing that two CIA directors that he really didn't do much work for called him super important, and that he spent a lot of time in the CIA and then in the CIA in New York when all this stuff was going on, and then died immediately after retiring. Just an interesting kind of side note in history. I'm sure there are people in conspiracy circles who have all sorts of theories about the guy, but I was able to find very little information or very little discussion on him. But seems to be too specific of a name for Pynchon to include here to not be a particular reference to him. Yeah, Will or Cody?
I was just saying that's very interesting. I did very surface level read on him from his Wikipedia page, but I just didn't go beyond that. So
yeah,
but it sounds like there's not much to find anyways. So it's very very curious.
Yeah, very odd. And his obituary is in like plain text archival format on the Washington Post's website. It's not even like the article anymore. Yeah, so then he goes on to say that Moskowitz is this decorated Bunko Squad veteran, and then he talks about the rest of the people that he mentioned. I also love the inclusion here of Maxine beams brightly and sips her sudden enlightenment organic bamboo tea. I noted in the margins of this one that Pynchon is really ahead of the times here. I feel like so much of the like spiritual boom of the 80s that we've talked about a lot with Pynchon's work just trickled down into consumer products in the 90s and 2000s and has been given somewhat of a rebirth in the modern era, with everyone drinking like kombucha or all these different like weird elixirs that are supposed to like help with your dopamine levels in your brain or make you focus or whatever. Just an interesting side note that he left in here. Also, the fact that perhaps Sean is selling this in his office or making it available to his clients because they're still in his waiting room. Just another part of his sort of weird sort of facade that he has going. But the two of them agree to go on a date. They like each other at least that much, and so the next day they go on a noon swimming date at the Deseret pool. And there's just more jokes in here about human smell tending to peak on average at 11:45 a.m. Which Maxine wants to utilize to have him smell the crime scene where Lester was killed. I also feel like the dick joke here is pretty funny that Pynchon includes. She discreetly checks for dick size anyway. Curious also about any reaction he might be having to how she looks in this number she has on today. A high-ticket reformatting of the LBD into a swimsuit instead of the more or less disposable one she gets through the mail in floral prints it's better not to think about. And whoop, there it is, isn't it? Something, oh, I was just looking for my goggles. On your head? Right. I love that exchange from a standpoint of it's funny that he inserts that whoop, there it is, directly into like the narration text, but also it's just another example of like Maxine knows how good she looks. She's smart enough to be able to kind of make the situation work out for her, and is checking for the signs as to whether or not it's been received properly by the person watching her. Just another good example of just like her kind of awareness, which is great. And then after that, they talk to Joaquin briefly about the crime scene. He doesn't have anything to say, but I do love the fact that Joaquin says, around here it's deaf and dumb, policy of the building. Sorry, Maxine. She goes and swims here so often that the staff knows who she is, even though she doesn't live in the building. Like, I just find that to be a great detail. And it makes me wonder whether they know the scam that she's pulling or if they assume she's living there and she's just there that often. But at any rate, they go down underneath the pool, and Conkling sure does sniff out the air. And we also learn that the way Lester was killed was a knife was fired into the side of his head.
Jesus,
from what is potentially what is commonly called a ballistic knife. There's like some interesting history around the concept of a ballistic knife, because there's no actual proof that this is a thing that ever existed or was used by the Spetsnaz armed forces in Russia. The entire, as I learned from researching, the entire conception of this knife existing came from one book. This guy claiming to be like an ex special forces operative for Russia wrote that some people that were working in the Spetsnaz as part of their regular kit was a spring-loaded knife. It's like a throwaway line in this book called Inside the Aquarium. And that's where the entire conception of this as a weapon came from. There have been things created in the modern era for people to buy based off of it, and it was in a Call of Duty game, but there's no actual proof beyond this one guy with a throwaway line in his like tell-all memoir that might not be real, that these things were actually used at one point by Russian special forces. So when the line in here that says already asked him, he says that knife is an urban myth. He was in the Spetsnaz for about a century and never saw one. That's kind of true. It is just a weird piece of potential mythology from this guy who wrote a book a long time ago. And there's a potential that they're making it try to look like a Russian hit by deliberately using that kind of a weapon, which would make sense if Gabriel Ice potentially called in his intelligence agency connections to get this guy killed. And so he sniffs out a particular kind of cologne that doesn't seem to fit anything else in the crime scene. That indicates potentially either the killer or somebody arriving to look at the body before the police got there, and he can't ID it right offhand, but they decide to go back to Conkling's apartment where he pulls out a naser. Do we have any thoughts on the naser? It's quite a thing Pinchon came up with.
I just love the whole of the Maxine and Conkling interaction and partnership. It really leans into the absurdity of all of it.
Mhm.
And I absolutely love it. I think if he had tried to do this in a serious kind of tone, it wouldn't work. It would come off just weird. But given that he's playing with the detective novel and the way that he is, and that he's leaning into the absurdity and the humor of it, it makes it so much fun and almost like he's a James Bond parody in a way. Like he just has access to these skills and technologies that no one would possibly have, but sure, why not? He's got them. Yeah. And no one's going to question it. It's a naser. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Perfect.
Definitely.
It's just another one of those instances of Pynchon elevating technobabble.
Yeah.
Because like that, I mean, the explanation of how it works is nonsense. At the same time, it is just convincing enough that even this book that's full of, essentially reality checking from the narrator, from the characters, and from the reader, you can let some disbelief slip by.
Very true. Yeah, I mean, he correctly identifies the cologne, so Maxine has something to go off of. And I do love the detail to the James Bond thing that he has an armory just full of colognes and perfumes that he needs to study as part of his work. It's just it's very funny, very absurd stuff, and their interplay with one another is pretty great. Big fan of it. So, she has something to add to her case notes that the person who was around the crime scene was wearing this particular cologne. Might have been a guy, might have been a woman trying to make it seem like a man was there. Who knows? Then there's a brief moment of awkward silence where Pinchon ends it with well, as Scarlett O'Hara observes at the end of the movie ... For those who don't know, the line is "There's always tomorrow." Is what he's not including there, but it's pretty great stuff. Any thoughts on Conkling and all that before we go into the last dream of these chapters?
The audiobook narrator kind of gives him a southern dandy kind of accent. So that was an
Conkling?
interesting creative. Yeah, Conkling. Yeah, so that was an interesting creative choice. I don't think it's ever mentioned that he's southern or at all overly concerned with his appearance, but it was an interesting choice to me that kind of gave him a bit more life as a character.
That's interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
When you say southern, my mind is kind of thinking about it. Are you talking just a little bit of a drawl, or are we going full Knives Out here?
It's pretty. I mean, it's probably halfway between those two.
Okay.
Where it's more than a little bit, but it's less than a lot.
Well, yeah, now I'm reading that in the same way Conkling supposes that sniffing pure rose attar will turn your brain into red jello. Just imagining that in a foghorn leghorn. It works pretty well.
Oh, great. Now I'm going to have that's going to be in my brain now.
Oh my god. Yeah, that would be quite a way to reinterpret that. Full on Knives Out would be a fun way to read those lines too.
Yeah.
I mean, I could certainly see Conkling using a line like, "Now buttress yourself in all the belief you have in me."
Oh boy,
Oh, man.
yep, this is it. Check it out.
Yeah. Which, Knives Out, the Gravity's Rainbow joke in that movie is great.
Yeah.
It's a novel. I know, I haven't read it. Neither have I. Nobody has. But I like the title.
The best part of that is it's a lot like the Ron Swanson joke about Moby Dick.
Oh yeah.
where it's a beautiful encapsulation of the novel.
Yeah, he gives a adequate depiction of the entire thing, and then he just goes, "Nah, it's just about a man who hates a fish." Yeah, that is one of my favorite jokes in that show. I love that. That's why it's his favorite book too.
Yeah.
It's a simple story about a man who hates a fish. If that was what he wanted, he could read The Old Man and the Sea and get the same thing, but in a much smaller page size.
Well, Ron Swanson doesn't mess around.
This is true. He goes only for the best. So yeah, this chapter closes out with another dream. This time it says she dreams she's alone on the top floor of the desert by the pool, under the unnaturally smooth surface visible through the optically perfect water. Almost as an afterthought to the anxious vacancy of the space, a male Caucasian corpse in a suit and tie stretches face up full length on the bottom as if taking a break from afterlife affairs, rolling in some eerie semi-sleep from one side to another. It is Lester Trapes, and it isn't. When she leans over the edge to get a closer look, his eyes open, and he recognizes her. He doesn't have to rise up through the surface to speak. She can hear him from underwater. Azrael is what he's saying, and then again, with some urgency. Gargamel's cat? Maxine inquires. Like on the Smurfs? No. And the disappointment to Lester, not Lester's face, tells her that she should know better. In non-biblical Jewish tradition, as she is perfectly aware, Azrael is the angel of death. In Islam also, for that matter. And briefly, she is back in the corridor. Gabriel Ice's guarded mystery tunnel out in Montauk. Why? It'd be an interesting question to pursue, except that Giuliani, in his tireless quest for quality infrastructure, has caused not one but several jackhammers to start up well before working hours, figuring the taxpayers won't object to extra overtime pay, and any message is corrupted, fragmented, and lost. What do we think about this dream that Maxine has?
Okay. I love the fact that in this, what is it? One paragraph, two paragraphs.
Yeah.
We have a beautifully terrifying scene that starts with the body in the pool, and the floating nature of it, and it's gorgeously written. Very effective at creating this sort of tension that's here in the dream, which is immediately broken by Maxine asking if it's fucking Gargamel's cat from the Smurfs, and then gets shifted back into a sort of serious discussion about the meaning of Azrael, and then ends with a dig on Giuliani and his attempts to completely gentrify New York City. There's a lot of work going on in two paragraphs, and I absolutely love it. That might be the most pinch-on part of these chapters.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Any other interpretations people have for this?
Well, I think there's kind of a route one where you can cast Gabriel Ice or the strange child in fatigues as Azrael, as you sort of alluded to earlier, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, I mean, I do find it hard to dig much more out of it, except that, essentially there is something deep inside of whatever killed Lester Trapes that is indivisible from like actual death itself in some real sense, some metaphysical one rather than metaphorical.
Yeah, I think the leaning into my formal education in theology, I think it's interesting that he picks Azrael, because Azrael is not a malevolent like version of an angel of death. Like Azrael is not Satan, who's God's prosecutor. Azrael actually isn't even in the Talmud or the Torah. He gets mentioned in the Zohar, which is the mystic elements within Judaism. And his conception in Islam also is not as a prosecutor or as a wrathful aspect of God's sort of psychopomp. He is instead someone who is basically like the ferryman for the dead. Like in hadiths in Islam, he's depicted as like God's messenger for the people who are going to die. Like in one particular hadith, God drops a leaf from a tree that has the name of someone who's going to die 40 days from that point, and it's up to Azrael to read the name and then like go coordinate that person's passage from like life to death. And in Judaism, in the Zohar religion, or the Zohar tradition of the religion, he does a very similar task. He's just there to bring people from one world to Karet, or the world to come. That's all he does. So there's nothing in the character that would have this inherent menace or potentially like evil aspect that the earlier scene in Montauk would seem to indicate should be there. Instead, I think what this is trying to say within the dream that Maxine is having is that, like, whatever Gabriel Ice is doing, whatever he's doing with the CIA and with potentially other world governments within that underground bunker, whatever conspiracy it's pointing towards, is going to require a large ferrying of people from life to death. And so the fact that the deceased man, the Lester, not Lester, is calling this out, and that she is brought back to the tunnel in her dream, is meant to be an indicator that whatever is being planned there is going to require the work of Azrael to a high degree. And so we get the child coming out of the dark, and I think it's interesting that it is posed as a child, because outside of like certain horror traditions, like The Exorcist or The Omen or things like that, children are usually not perceived by people as something inherently like evil or off-putting or wrong. But death is something to be afraid of. And so I feel like potentially the decision from Pynchon to have the character that he later kind of refers to as Azrael being a child, but in military fatigues, is supposed to be indicative of this idea that what is being planned, what is going to take place, is going to require a great deal of work from the Angel of Death. And Maxine's fear comes from the fact that death itself is scary, obviously, but the military fatigues are I think meant to indicate that this work that Azrael is going to have to do is coming about from the military industrial complex, is coming about from everything else. But his appearance as a child is meant to indicate that potentially he himself is not the evil that is being done here. It is the inherent horror of what he is being ferried to do this work by that has the evil aspect or the fear or the inherent horror attached to it. And because he's walking out of that towards Maxine, indicates potentially, what that greater context. And then additionally, you could look at it as Azrael is approaching Maxine in a place where if she continues walking forward, she will die. Like if she continues going down that corridor, she's going to end up wherever the radio chatter was coming from that she overheard, and they will likely kill her. And so almost the appearance of Azrael in that place is also a warning for her to turn back and run before he grabs her, basically. That's kind of my interpretation of where this dream is pointing towards and what it has in greater context to Montauk. Because the interesting thing as well is that when the Lester, not Lester, points out the name and she goes back to the space that she's in, it doesn't say that the child is still there. It just says that she's where the child was. So like the death that this after image of Lester is pointing out is indeed this hallway, and it is going to cause the death that is coming. But in this instance, since she's in a dream state, potentially the messenger of death that she would have been taken by if she continued down the hall isn't there, because she's safely investigating it. That's my interpretation of this dream and how it kind of goes back to the earlier mention of that kind of specter that came out of the darkness.
I have nothing to add to that. That was absolutely great.
Any funny parts that anyone had that we didn't go over covering the chapter?
Mine was just all the nose jokes in chapter 18, like
Yeah, there's a lot of those.
Yeah, those were really
all the
good.
puns. Yeah.
I think we covered everything. I think for me, I really liked the porn that devolved into an improv set that would drive high school drama teachers to drug abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That was
that's
nice.
that's the one I was going to mention, was that in the midst of all of that horror, there's just this weird, absurd scene. Yeah.
All right. Well, that brings us to quotes. Who wants to go first?
Well, you stole two of mine when you
Well,
read them earlier, but that's
sorry.
fine. No, that's all good. I got one more. There's a lot of them in here, which is nice.
There's a lot of very good ones. Yeah.
So mine is I read a little bit of it earlier. It's where we just talked about with the videotape that she gets, and it's the beginning of page 177. She's relieved in a way to see it isn't going to be the Hamptons of legend. At least she has spent more time there than it was worth. This is more like French Hampton, where the working population are often angry to the point of homicide because their livelihoods depend on servicing the richer and more famous, up to whom they must never miss a chance to suck. Time-battered houses, scrub pine roadside businesses, no lights or decoration up, so the winter here must be in the deep and dateless vacancy after the holiday season. The shot enters a dirt road lined with shacks and trailers and approaches what at first seems like a roadhouse because every window is pouring light. People are wandering around in and out of the place. Sounds of jollification and a music track, including Motor City Psychobilly, Elvis Hitler at the moment singing the Green Acres theme to the tune of Purple Haze and providing Maxine an unmeasured moment of nostalgia, so unlikely that she begins to feel targeted personally. I could keep that whole thing. I could keep going on. I did like specifically. There's one line a little bit later that says a king-sized fake Angora bedspread and a shade of purple peculiar to VHS tape. Such a hyper-specific shade of purple that I know, having watched a lot of VHS movies, that's a very unique shade of purple that you almost can't find anywhere else.
Yeah, that's very true. My quote might be a surprising one for people who track the kind of quotes that we pick. I'm sure one of you does that. Comes from page 178. It's the description of the actual threesome. I find it pretty impactful. Where it says, Jules and Jim, it isn't. Talk about double entry bookkeeping. As erotic material, there are shortcomings, to be sure. Boy and girl quality could do with an upgrade. Shay is a jolly enough girl, maybe a little vacant around the eyes. Vip is years overdue for some gym time, and Bruna comes across as a horny little runt with a tendency to shriek and a dick. Frankly, not big enough for the scenario, provoking expressions of annoyance from Shay and Vip whenever it approaches them for any purpose. Maxine is surprised to feel an unprofessional pulse of distaste for Vip, this needy, somehow groveling yup. If the other two are supposed to be worth the long schlep from Westchester, hours on the LIE, in addition supposedly less negotiable than crack, not to their youth, but to the single obvious thing their youth is good for, then why not kids who can pretend at least that they know what they're doing? But wait, she realizes, these are Yenta reflexes, like, please, Vip, you can do so much better, so forth. Doesn't even know him. Already she's criticizing his sex partner choices. I love that quote for a lot of reasons. One, it is really effective at selling the overall kind of distasteful nature of what she's watching. But then the additional aspects to her specifically criticizing not necessarily the performance, but the fact that it seems like literally everyone in this instance is uncomfortable, and for something that is supposedly supposed to be like this enjoyable thing, you know, having sex with not one but two people, it is turned into this sort of gross kind of tableau almost that she can't help but not look at. And then there's that additional aspect of character writing that he includes there, where constantly Maxine has to catch herself from these reflexes of turning into the most horrifying thing to her, which is a Jewish mother. And in this case, even that comes up where she can't stuff that impulse in her character down, where she ends up just feeling sorry for him, not just at the horror of the situation, but just like the is this the only option for you? Why are you capable of doing something else? It's an easy way to sort of pigeonhole that into simply a humorous comment, but I think it also speaks greatly to the type of woman that Maxine is, and I think it comes as no sort of surprise that this is intertwined with the fact that she's worried about Lester through all three of these chapters. And it shows that, like, even with these people she doesn't know, there is some impulse within her to wish the best for these people. And even in these like horrible, squalid scenarios, she can't quite divorce that part of her mind. It's quite good. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that quote.
So my quote comes from page 194. It's a part in the tunnel. She has come to a stairwell descending even deeper into the terminal moraine, further than she can see. Her coordinates all at once shift 90 degrees so that she can't tell now if she's staring vertically down uncountable levels or straight ahead down another long hallway. It lasts only a heartbeat, but how long does it have to? She imagines somebody's idea of a Cold War salvation down there, carefully situated at this American dead end. Some faith in brute depth, some prayerful confidence that a blessed few would survive, beat the end of the world and the welcoming in of the void. I mean, it's that quote. I mean, there's some parts of it that are a little bit hard to parse. I do think it kind of has to do with like fallout bunkers, stuff like that. I just love the prose in that quote, though.
Good one.
Yeah, I particularly like the inclusion of that welcoming the end of the world part of it as well, because if you look at that from a broader perspective of what the bunker represents, and the fact that 9/11, as I've said many times, was kind of an end of history thing, and her other dream about, you know, an Armageddon thing occurring, it feels particularly relevant.
So this is a new time. This is a new one, I guess. You all three of you, in sequence, chose the quotes I was picking.
Oh no.
we beat the final boss.
It's all, I mean, that's an impressive happening.
Broke him.
It's all over. It's the last show.
End of the podcast.
Well, thankfully, there's hardly a dearth of quotes in this section, but this one, please interrupt me if this is. I don't think this is one you read, Kate, but there were a couple of sections in the tunnel sequence where I did zone out while you were reading because I was trying to look things up.
I left most of those descriptions out, so you're probably okay.
I thought so, but I just, interrupt me if this is one, and I'll pick another. On 193, she moves cautiously in, a trespasser's timer blinking silently in her head. Some of the doors along the corridor are shut and locked, some are open, the rooms behind them empty in a chill and unnaturally tended way, as if bad history could be stabilized somehow and preserved for decades. Unless, of course, this is simply protected office space in here, some physical version of the dark archive at Hash Slingers that Eric has been looking into. It smells like bleach, as if recently disinfected. Concrete floors, channels leading to drains set at low points. Steel beams overhead with fittings whose purpose she can't or doesn't want to figure out. No furniture except for gray Formica office tables and folding chairs. Some 220-volt wall outlets, but no sign of heavy appliances. It's just very...
Yeah.
Simply good description, and you went into a lot of the reasons why already, Kate, in the general chapter overview. But I just find it, the specific details chosen are a wonderful mix of mundane, like the Formica office tables and folding chairs, and very sinister, like 220-volt wall outlets, which are not cheap to install. You don't just throw those in case you need them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you doing with those in this weird, endless tunnel, man?
Yeah, it's really frightening, and the fact that Pynchon has the presence of mind to like further expand on why you'd need a 220-volt outlet by including the line about how there's no heavy machinery or power tools in sight is just a genius choice on his part. Yeah, really, really good stuff. Most Pynchon part of the chapter. What does everyone have for that?
I was going to say just all of the horror sections of these chapters. I still stand by that, but I kind of think I'm going to go with that last dream at the end of chapter 18. I think that is a distillation of a lot of his best writing, and the juxtaposition from the horror to the comedy, back to the horror, and then into the Barb against Giuliani. It's Pinchon in two paragraphs.
Yeah, that's for sure.
My
Will-
most mentioned part is Will can go next actually in case we steal it.
I was gonna say, yeah.
I'm actually fairly unconcerned about that, but I'm happy to go.
Challenge accepted.
I do think that it's one of those. I have a hard time imagining any other author coming up with this. I guess you call it a joke, but basically everything that Sean tells Maxine in that second time she goes to see him in this section, where she's freaking out, and as you all said, like, that is from a professional standpoint. I mean, it is negligence. It almost rises to the level of criminality when somebody comes into you with that kind of a break in reality, and all you do is belittle them.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it's incredibly Pinchonian for that to be like the wisest thing the character says in the entire book so far.
Mm-hmm.
Because up until now, he's just like recycled koans and like marketing jingles essentially. But here he is like actually getting at the important thing. It's not the way that you treat somebody who's questioning reality,
Right.
but it is like ultimately the point of the issue. Not cute, Sean. The guy just died? Didn't die? Made news on WYUP. Got on the subway with some unidentified babe. Make up your mind. Because, ultimately, she does just have to decide which she believes.
Mm-hmm.
She's in a situation where it might not be real, or he might not be dead. Odds are he is dead. Odds are she just saw someone who looked a little bit like him. She just needs to make up her mind.
True enough.
Mm-hmm.
Luke?
Mine is probably a tie between the Conkling character in general and just everything related to him. It's very Pinchonian to me. And then I also thought the Burning Coal koan, that inclusion was very Pinchonian.
Yeah, this one's hard for me because there's a lot of really good choices that one could go through. I think that, probably the depiction of all of the stuff with real estate feels particularly Pinchonian to me, with the contractors and the specific mention of Donald Trump and all of that. I think that between it, being Pynchon as having a clear understanding of how New York real estate operates, especially at that high of a level, but also the kind of clear foreshadowing of 2008 that would happen, even though the novel was written afterwards. It feels like a particularly Pynchonian thing for him to do, not just because of the set dressing and the importance that it has to the kind of time and place, but also because we know how much that guy hates real estate and land development and everything that goes into that. It's not unsurprising to me that he would take a moment to talk about a lot of the structural issues that led to the 2008 collapse from the kind of 1% perspective and how it trickled down to affect the average person. It's a different way to analyze some of that from what movies and TV have done before. Well, that pretty much does it for this episode. We did get someone on Instagram sending us a photo of a headstone that says wind dust on it. If you want to write to us and tell us further what that might be from,
context, please.
Yeah, my guess is that you were just walking through a cemetery and saw that and went, "Oh, that's crazy," and took a photo and sent it to us. But if there's something more to it than that, I think we'd all love to know what that is. But other than that, we do not have any other listener comments or questions. But you can certainly email us or reach out to us on social media. Our email is mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. We are on Twitter at pinchonpod. We are also on Instagram at mappingthezonepod podcast. Yeah, as always, feel free to reach out with any additional revelations or understandings that you have of these chapters that we maybe didn't get to in our episode or overlooked. And next week we are going to be back discussing chapters 19, 20, and 21. Without further ado, thanks for listening.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Can you fit a Zima bottle in a Filofax?
Okay.
I was hoping there would be an easy
Or-
link, just searching
or are we not-
phylogeny and morphology. To put
Are we
in
not
the-
mixing business and pleasure? Is that forbidden by the Filofax company?
I'm sure that I could get a pencil bag insert that I could probably put a Zima bottle into.
It's got to have enough room to have a couple of freezer packs. To keep it cold. Why is this binder freezing cold? Oh.
No, I mean I wasn't joking. I have considered buying one. I went the traveler's notebook route instead. Same vibe, just slightly different.
Yeah. Why is this freezing cold? I gotta keep my Zima cold.
Duh.
Oh my god. All of my employees are so young that I could probably drink a Zima and none of them would think that I was drinking alcohol.
They would probably just think it's like some kind of weird lemonade or something.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest. Drinking out of a Filofax seems like the most yuppie version of a brown paper bag, possible.
It really does. Yeah, it is. I mean, 501 hits. You got to unzip it, grip it, and rip it. That should be the slogan for the company. I think at this point
For Zima or Filofax?
For both. They need to merge. Bring Zima back. Put it in a Filofax. Unzip it, grip it, and rip it.
As soon as 501 hits.
Yeah, that's it. Businesswoman ends and party girl begins. I'm doing your advertising for them. They need to call me.
I feel like that has to be the ad read for this episode.
It's gonna be. I'm writing it down right now.
And you can just keep all this audio for the end as an explanation. Oh, never have I been more personally targeted by an advertisement than this.
So is the ad going to be for specifically the flask attachment?
Yeah, the it's got it like the bottle bag or something like that. I got to come up with a
The
good name for it.
Filofax bottle bag. Oh god.
The Filofax secret sipper?
Ooh, there you
Secret
go.
Sipper's a good one.
Hold on, I gotta get my document up so I can write this down.
So I
Secret.
found something that might summarize morphology and phylogeny as like a meme.
Okay.
But it's just like an abstract of an article that is clearly almost entirely referencing previous publications. So scanning over it, my brain is melting because it's switching from English to German to French.
Great.
Great, good stuff. This is not helpful.
Perfect content.
Can't put that in the show notes.
I can translate the German for you, but French I'm lost on.
Well, I mean, I know what it is, so I don't need it, but I
Okay.
appreciate the offer. But it's just I made a joke that very few people will get.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever.
Amazing.